Chapter 921, Black Tide Monsters Appearing Early. While speaking, the rotting goat monster had already charged to Maria's front. Maria crossed her hands in front of her chest and produced unclear musical scales from her mouth. Immediately, a huge cross-shaped flame suddenly blazed from her arms. The rotting goat crashed headfirst into the flames. The flames weren't scattered by the impact, but instead actively bent to wrap the monster entirely. 4 fire ropes suddenly bound the rotting goat into a ball, then tightened again, cutting into flesh and skin. Maria raised her hand and released a magic scroll. The scroll burned in the air and transformed into a sharp arrow, piercing the flame-wrapped rotting goat directly from the center of its skull to the base of its tail. The rotting goat, which had been silently roaring just moments ago, immediately withered and then turned to ash in the flames. The ash fell through gaps in the flames, including a palm-sized grayish-white bone fragment. Maria's eyes lit up and she immediately rushed down. She caught that bone fragment near the sea surface. However, at this moment, a huge circular shadow suddenly appeared beneath the sea surface. This shadow appeared silently. Maria's attention was entirely focused on her spoils of war, and she didn't notice what was below her feet at all. As Maria approached the sea surface, the shadow suddenly shot up from beneath the sea. It was actually a huge mouth with a ring of sharp teeth. Maria only reacted when the monster leaped from the sea surface. Her first instinct was to escape upward while releasing a protective shield. However, while she was too nervous to consider Saul above her, a large number of black objects suddenly rained down from above. It was like a sudden black downpour. Ida! The huge mouth on the sea surface immediately let out a wail. Foul-smelling gas sprayed from its throat, directly knocking Maria off balance. She had just stabilized her form in the air when she looked down and saw that the huge mouth that had been about to ambush her was now riddled with holes. Seawater rushed up through the wounds. The big-mouth monster was sinking, spouting water columns from its mouth, somewhat like fountains in a small plaza. As the monster sank, the water columns converged into a puddle and finally merged into the deep blue sea. Maria looked up at Saul. Seeing that he made no movement, she immediately jumped into the sea, circled around the sinking monster once, then dried the water from her body and returned to Saul's side. The smile on her face carried hints of shock and admiration. She held the grayish-white bone fragment out to Saul. That big-mouth monster fish didn't have any gray bones. This one's for you. Without you, even if I could have escaped, I definitely couldn't have kept it. Saul didn't politely decline and accepted the grayish-white bone fragment. This grayish-white bone was quite similar to the bone monster Saul had obtained in the Chaos Realm. It contained a small amount of black tide pollution. That erosive feeling that tried to penetrate your body upon contact and seep into your brain along skin patterns was unusually obvious. But it was precisely this undisguised aggressiveness that made Saul deploy defenses the moment he touched it. However, the pollution within was incomparable to the bone monsters brought from the Chaos Realm. This monster is half-rotten. The Chaos Realm has white bones, and that world outside the Chaos Realm is filled with grayish-white skeletons. Could there be some kind of progressive relationship between them? Saul was looking down in thought. Maria didn't know what he was thinking and assumed he was using mental power to study the gray bone. She enthusiastically and proactively helped introduce it to Saul. This kind of gray bone could be called a specialty of the Sighing Wall. Some can also be collected from the southeastern waters of Nefret, but the quantity and size can't compare to what the monsters here produce. Don't let the small amount of pollution on it fool you. It can be made into potions that resist black tide pollution through special methods. So every time we fight these monsters, we pay attention to whether there are gray bones inside the corpses. Can it actually be made into potions that resist pollution? Is this a case of antidotes always being found near poisons? I haven't heard that saying, but it's very similar to what you described. A wizard once tried to transform his body into a form similar to gray bones to resist black tide pollution, but he ultimately failed and the entire person mutated into a monster. Maria paused. I personally killed him. Looking at the gray bone in his hand, Saul actually thought of how his own bones had once turned black due to the black tide. Could this count as a type of gray bone mutation? When gray bones were defeated by the black tide, would they completely rot and become bone monsters? Then, under the influence of the abyssal eye, would they become anchor points? But if gray bones withstood the pollution and developed resistance, would they eventually become Saul's black skeletal frame? No wonder he wanted to take my arm back then, Saul murmured quietly. Frim's real target probably wasn't my twice-modified soul-devouring resin, but my bones. Seeing Maria still looking at him, Saul put away the gray bone. Thank you. I'm quite interested in this gray bone. When I encounter black tide monsters later and get gray bones, I'll give you one back. Maria smiled generously, fine lines appearing at the corners of her eyes. No need, no need. When the black tide invasion comes, I'll be able to collect quite a few. This is to thank you for helping just now. How could I let you pay me back? The wizards at the sighing wall all seemed quite generous. Could it be that Murphy's merit-based resource distribution system had fostered everyone's current way of interacting? Of course, it was also possible they currently had requests of Saul, so they appeared very generous and kind. Regardless of where this goodwill originated, it didn't have much impact on Saul. He advocated for equivalent exchange. Once causality came into play, he didn't believe many people would dare break their word with him. After dealing with the monsters, the two prepared to continue their journey. But before leaving, Saul noticed Maria also made a mark at the position where the big-head monster fish had sunk. Do you also salvage monster corpses? Maria shook her head. Generally not, but that monster just now was very powerful. Normally such powerful monsters don't appear before the black tide arrives. Even if they do appear, they would be intercepted by the forward wizard towers. I just don't understand why it could infiltrate this far. After I escort you over, I'll investigate further. There are quite a few second-rank wizards in the rear areas. It would be too dangerous if they encountered the big-head monster fish. This patrol wizard seemed quite dedicated. Saul didn't delay any further. The two flew rapidly over Storm Sea. After more than 10 minutes, they finally saw Gorsa's wizard tower. It's over there. The farthest one is Lord Gorsa's wizard tower. Maria pointed ahead. She stopped here, obviously not wanting to escort Saul to the door. Saul looked over and discovered that almost no other wizard towers could be seen near that tower. It was a solitary tower deep in Storm Sea. When he had just arrived, he had only vaguely seen another wizard tower from the rear side direction. Saul also stopped and turned to ask Maria, should I ask Master Gorsa if he noticed the big-head monster fish? No need. I should investigate first. When I understand the situation clearly, I'll go inquire with Lord Gorsa if necessary. Maria quickly waved her hands. It wouldn't be good to disturb Lord Gorsa when we don't know anything. Chapter 922. I don't taste good. Saul stood at the top floor of the wizard tower that stood alone on Storm Sea, gently knocking on the door. Before he could knock a second time, the door was opened by someone, silently, the hinges well-maintained and not rusted in this humid environment. Behind the door stood a black human silhouette. From the graceful body curves, it could be seen to be a woman. Saul was momentarily stunned, as if he had returned to that dark wizard tower from the past and saw Lady Yura standing before him. But he quickly smiled self-mockingly. Lady Yura never opened doors. You're correct, so I'm Heidi. I wonder if you still remember me. The black shadow spoke with a somewhat sharp female voice, very much like an old witch's voice from stories. However, Saul quickly recognized this voice. Heidi, Haywood's sister, you've actually become like this. Saul remembered. Wasn't Heidi that ugly face that had been parasitic on the back of Haywood's head? He hadn't expected her to be transformed into the shadow form that Lady Yura once had. I'm honored you still remember me. Heidi curtsied, no longer showing her former madness but appearing much more polite and rational. However, I can't delay your time to see Lord Gorsa. Please follow me. Heidi didn't dare chat much with Saul, because Gorsa was already waiting for Saul in the bottom floor room. Following Heidi down the stairs, halfway he saw Haywood waiting on the middle floor. The other party seemed too embarrassed to speak with Saul, just standing guard at the corridor entrance and bowing respectfully to Saul. Saul also nodded in return, then watched him disappear from view. After all these years, Haywood and Heidi were still third-level wizard apprentices. Although they had been following Master Gorsa all along, the latter apparently had no intention of forcibly helping them advance. Perhaps in Gorsa's mind, there was no difference between third-level apprentices and first-rank true wizards. Lost in thought, Saul had already reached the bottom floor. Heidi couldn't proceed any further from here. Please go in. Lord Gorsa said you don't need to knock. Saul nodded, thanked his old acquaintance, then pushed open the door and entered. The door opened, and a dim light shone out. Very strange. Clearly the corridor lighting was brighter than inside the room, yet it was the room's light projecting outward. Near the door, the brightness was obviously much dimmer than other places. Saul looked at the ground and stepped into the room. Then he felt something touch his hand, though clearly no one was nearby. Again the feeling of being touched, this time on his arm. Saul looked down and saw several small round black shadows beside his own shadow on the ground. These black shadows were bouncing and touching Saul's shadow, making him personally aware of it. Come in, they mean no harm, they're just curious seeing a stranger. Gorsa's voice came from deep within the room. Saul walked in and closed the door behind him. The moment the door closed, he suddenly saw his own shadow also transform into countless small black dots, then get drawn away by the small dots that had been touching it earlier. Watching his shadow split apart and disappear, Saul felt like his own child had been lured away by strangers. He followed the lively shadows around two fully packed storage shelves and saw Gorsa standing at the far end of the room. The other party still had his back turned, conducting experiments. This was Saul's first time seeing Gorsa doing experiments. In the past at the Wizard Tower, every time he saw him, he was either sleepwalking at midnight or sitting on that huge pink sofa reading books. He didn't seem like a wizard at all. Today was a rare diligence. Saul didn't avoid looking and walked directly to Gorsa's side, turning his head to see him dropping a black lump into a beaker half filled with liquid. The black lump was like a piece of amber, slightly transparent with some elasticity. After being submerged in the liquid, it quickly began to shrink. In just over 10 seconds, the black lump disappeared completely, fully dissolved into the liquid. Do you know what this is? Gorsa casually picked up an identical black lump from the experiment table and tossed it to Saul, then leaned sideways against the table. Saul caught the black lump and observed it, then tested it with magical power. Black sea tree source, but it should have other things added to it. It has me added to it. Gorsa pointed to his own nose and said with a smile. Saul was startled. Are you trying to perform wizard body transformation on yourself? Already finished. Now I'm testing to see if there are other improvement methods. Gorsa looked at the beaker where the black lump could no longer be seen, but improvements aren't that easy. Wizard body transformation was generally very private magic. Since the other party hadn't volunteered the information, Saul couldn't ask about the specific transformation formula. Gorsa also didn't seem to have any intention of asking Saul to help with ideas. After showing Saul his transformation results, he put away everything on the experiment table. When Gorsa was casting magic, Saul suddenly felt a familiar aura. He quickly turned to look at Gorsa. "Master." Gorsa showed no concealment whatsoever, smiling calmly. "You sensed it. Well, it is your soul fragment after all." "When did Master Gorsa obtain my soul fragment?" Saul remembered that Kismet had once asked him for a strand of soul fragment. Could Master Gorsa have taken it from Kismet? "Do you remember when you had just learned soul projection and were bitten by the mouths in the gap layer?" Gorsa reminded Saul. What, it was then? Saul suddenly understood. "Right, the wraiths in the gap layer were also under your control." But he looked at Gorsa resentfully. Had Gorsa directed those wraiths to attack him back then? Gorsa showed no embarrassment at being caught. "It's not my fault. Your soul was very delicious to those wraiths. I merely retrieved the soul fragments they couldn't digest afterward." Oh, anyway, it had been so long ago now. Whatever Master Gorsa said was what it was. Saul no longer dwelled on this. "You fused the soul fragment into your soul body. Won't this cause soul body mutation?" Pure soul fragments could be used to supplement mental power, but the soul fragments Saul had given Gorsa weren't purified. Absorbing them rashly was very dangerous. If Saul didn't have the diary's help in removing impurities from mental fragments, he wouldn't dare directly absorb so many soul fragments either. Moreover, what Gorsa had fused was Saul's soul fragment, not his own. Not to boast, but Saul's soul fragments contained the power of the star-shaped eyes. One careless moment, and Saul could imagine Gorsa being swallowed by eyeballs. "It's fine." Gorsa showed no fear, apparently having countermeasures. Perhaps separated soul fragments could no longer use the star-shaped eye's power. That way it wouldn't be so dangerous. Saul nodded, choosing to trust his master. Suddenly, he noticed Gorsa's shadow on the ground was twisting and deforming, like a cake slowly expanding and distorting in an oven, bubbling with huge air pockets. "Master." Saul was alarmed and quickly turned to look at Gorsa's actual body. In a trance, the other party's body had actually become like the shadow. That handsome face and slender neck swelled in an instant, bulging with irregular flesh bubbles. His bloodless lips split bit by bit until they reached the back of his head. When his mouth opened, inside was endless darkness, as if it could swallow everything. "You see," his voice remarkably unchanged, as if his vocal cords had been relocated to other parts of his body, "I just swallowed a tiny bit of your soul fragment and became like this. If I could eat you completely." Gorsa's upper body, still maintaining human form, leaned forward slightly. The two had been standing close to begin with, and now his mutated huge mouth was about to swallow Saul's head. Who would have thought? Saul neither dodged nor avoided, saying calmly, "Then you wouldn't be you anymore." "Gorsa." "Gorsa, that makes sense." The swollen skin contracted. The deformed face returned to normal. He became the original Gorsa with that faint smile again. Chapter 923, Smashing Through the Wall. But the diary showed no reaction, and Saul also trusted his own judgment. Or rather, he trusted himself. A living wizard Saul was more valuable than a dead Saul's soul. "Have you already taken control of the inverted tree at Baton Academy?" Gorsa, having returned to his original appearance, seemed to instantly forget the previous conflict and asked about something else instead. "Not control, more like an alliance formed to defeat enemies when I was at Baton Academy." Saul didn't hide anything either. Gorsa might have already met Shea at Kemaduchi. The soul fused with the inverted tree is called Shea, originally a first-rank wizard at Baton Academy. He has persecution complex, though he's been much better recently. Are you looking for him? After Shea had cooperated with Kelly to rescue Kira, He was currently rooted in the suburbs of Kema's capital city. Kira had deliberately allocated him a large territory to develop as he pleased. It had now become a small forest. Of course, it had also become forbidden ground for ordinary people. Shea had therefore provided Saul with a wave of fate power feedback. Now both Shea and Mido had their own backing, steadily supplying Saul with power. As for the most powerful Floco, he only generated fate power at intervals. It came in bursts, like an electrocardiogram. The Mermaid clan probably gave him quite a headache too. I wanted to get some inverted tree to research, but there probably isn't time now. I'll talk about it when I return. Gorsa never seemed to worry about not returning. Of course, Saul directly agreed on Shea's behalf. How confident are you that you can return? Although asking this showed some lack of faith in Master Gorsa, he still wanted to ask, not caring about appearances. No confidence, Gorsa lightly uttered 2 words. Not self-deprecating, not joking. Master, since you have no confidence, why do you dare go to the Abyssal Eye? The wall has blocked my path, so naturally I have to smash through it. Gorsa's tone was light, as if it were perfectly natural. What if you get killed in the crash? Good thing Haywood and Heidi hadn't come in, or they would have been frightened by Saul's questions. But Gorsa calmly accepted Saul's doubts. If I get killed, then I die. But I still have to try to smash a hole in the wall and see what's really behind it. Paving the way for future generations. You're truly great. Gorsa's mouth twitched. He probably hadn't heard anyone praise him with such words before. Don't be disgusting. A pink sofa appeared behind him. He fell backward into it, sinking into the sofa. I'm just doing this for myself, doing what I want to do. By the way, do you have a dead wizard's diary? Saul directly admitted, yes. He raised his hand. The dark red hardcover book appeared in his palm, and he casually extended it toward Gorsa. This is it. Gorsa wasn't polite either, reaching out to take it, but his fingertips passed through air. He could only touch emptiness. He swept his hand back and forth twice, but still couldn't contact the diary. It seems this book already belongs to you. If you hadn't actively made it appear before my eyes, I still wouldn't be able to sense its existence. Saul withdrew his hand, looking at the hardcover book that had substantial weight in his hands. I obtained it very early, but I still haven't completely unraveled the secrets on it. However, it deserves much credit for my rapid advancement to 3rd rank. Its power is indeed very special, and it's a form of power I've never seen before. So if we're really talking about talent, I can't compare to Kelly. Without the diary, I might have died long ago. Gorsa rested his arms on the sofa's armrests, sinking back into the backrest again. Many people have owned this book, but they all died too. Before Saul could discern whether the other party was comforting him, he asked in surprise, "You've seen this diary. You know its previous owners." "I'm guessing." Gorsa stared at Saul's hand. What he saw in Saul's palm was a mass of twisted shadow with terrifying ghostly faces occasionally appearing on it, roaring and wailing, though it probably didn't look like this in Saul's eyes. "Your diary carries very heavy resentment. It will bring disaster. Probably only in your hands can it bloom into a lump of flowers." Was lump the proper quantifier for flowers? After internally complaining, Saul smiled again. "Thank you." He took a deep breath and finally made up his mind. "Master, I have a special method that might be able to help you a little. I can establish a connection between us. When you enter the Abyssal Eye, it can provide you with power and also help mark the path back to Stat." Gorsa watched Saul, not joking, rarely thinking seriously. After 5 minutes, he slowly shook his head. "Not good. We understand far too little about the Abyssal Eye. No one can guarantee whether the Abyssal Eye's power and pollution might follow the connection to find you." Saul was about to explain the special nature of fate lines, but Gorsa raised his hand to stop him. I understand you want to help me, but my going to the Abyssal Eye isn't really mindlessly seeking death. Gorsa smiled slightly, his eyes narrowing. I've also left myself an escape route. As if not wanting Saul to persuade him further, Gorsa stood up and knocked on the wizard tower's wall. I originally wanted to use dark attributes to advance to 3rd rank because I didn't want to be trapped here wasting time after reaching 3rd rank. But when I actually came to the Sighing Wall, I discovered that coming here was actually correct. It helped me correct my path. He turned back to suggest to Saul, if you don't have other urgent matters to handle, then guard here for a while. The Black Tide battles here are different from those on Nefret's southeastern coast. Lord Murphy also suggested this to me. I've already agreed to it. Saul also mentioned the 2 Black Tide monsters he had encountered on his way there. I found that the Black Tide monsters here are individually more powerful. The Black Tide monsters on Nefret's side are very numerous, but their individual strength can't compare to here, and the monsters there don't seem to drop gray bones either. Yes, there aren't many monsters here, but each one is formidable. Some can even match 3rd rank wizards, and, forget it, you'll see when the time comes. So, Master, shouldn't you describe the enemy situation clearly before battle? Or do you have too much confidence in your apprentice? Although Saul was internally complaining, he was still very confident and didn't become nervous because of Gorsa's half-spoken words. Gorsa said nothing more, seeming to fall into deep thought. After a moment he suddenly came back to himself and began driving Saul away. All right, go find a wizard tower to guard quickly. With your current strength, you can choose any of them. Stop bothering me while I'm experimenting. Chapter 924, Unsettling Factors. He tested and found he could still teleport to Kelly's side. Others worried about Black Tide pollution, but he wasn't afraid. Just as Saul was about to teleport, he suddenly saw a figure flying over hurriedly. It was the patrol wizard Maria, who had just parted ways with him. Lord Saul, did you see Wizard Gorsa? Maria looked somewhat anxious. I just came out. My master is conducting experiments. Do you need to find him? Maria breathed a sigh of relief. Then there's no need. Saul him. She asked about him, but then didn't need to find him. Maria quickly explained. While investigating the Black Tide monster invasion, I discovered that a 3rd rank wizard has gone missing. What? Even though he wasn't from the Sighing Wall, Saul could understand Maria's tension. That was a 3rd rank wizard. How could they just disappear casually? At this time, 3 more wizards flew over from the distance. Their expressions were relatively calm, which made the nervous Maria feel somewhat reassured. Lady Maria, a female wizard, approached Maria's side. Currently, no other wizards are missing. Maria had already guessed from their expressions. She turned back to Saul. We need to go check the missing wizard's tower. Saul, will you return to the Sighing Wall first to choose a wizard tower to guard, or come with us to take a look? I'll go with you, Saul said immediately. He followed Maria in their actions, and discovered that the direction they were heading was toward the tower closest to Master Gorsa's wizard tower. Although close, it was still quite far from Master Gorsa's wizard tower. Accommodating the speed of the 2nd rank wizards, they arrived beneath that wizard tower. From the outside, the wizard tower before them showed no signs of damage whatsoever, only that the door was half open, revealing a dark gap inside. After approaching, the group didn't immediately enter but instead spread out and very skillfully began setting up magical arrays. Saul observed the door and discovered several dried water stains on it. The stains were yellowish, and from their outline they looked like something had wriggled across the ground, with slight dragging marks. At this time, the other wizards had finished setting up the magical array. The array used the 3 wizards' bodies as nodes, projecting 3 light pillars that spread evenly. The overlapping portions formed an even brighter area that perfectly enveloped the slender wizard tower. "We can go in now," Maria said, then took the lead entering the light-shrouded wizard tower. The door was pushed open and actually made a creak sound. Saul glanced sideways at the door crack, where there were already traces of rust. "Normal doors wouldn't be like this," Maria said. "It should have been caused by the intruder." "The intruder probably came from the sea," Saul said, casually releasing several illumination spells to light up the ground. "Look at the traces on the floor." The areas illuminated by the light all had some slight scraping marks. Maria crouched down and very carefully ran her hand over the traces on the ground. A bit of flame rose from her fingertips and quickly extinguished. "These are scale marks." Maria furrowed her brow, her expression somewhat heavy. A wizard behind them seemed to remember something and quickly said, "Could it be mermaids?" The others also chimed in. There were indeed reports of mermaid sightings in Storm Sea recently. "I heard that when they fled from the Red Sea, they caused big trouble for the tribunal and nearly destroyed their Red Sea trees. Looks like they've now come to cause trouble beneath the Sighing Wall." These people only knew a rough outline about mermaids. Saul shook his head. Individual mermaids aren't that strong. At most they're equivalent to first-rank wizards. The mermaid aberrant at the Red Sea back then was a fusion of over 100,000 mermaids, and it also utilized the pollution brought by the black tide assault to cause large-scale destruction. The 3 wizards beside them all looked over suspiciously. "This is Wizard Saul. He was present when the mermaid uprising occurred." Only then did Maria introduce him to the group, using her gaze to warn everyone. "Wizard Saul is a third-rank wizard and also a guest invited by the Sighing Wall for temporary guard duty." The wizards were startled. They hadn't expected the wizard before them to actually be third rank. He hadn't externally projected mental power and looked very young. They hadn't imagined he was already a third-rank wizard. These wizards were all second rank. In other places they would already be very formidable and could serve as leaders of factions, but at the Sighing Wall they were the backbone, meaning very common existences. They stopped talking and waited for Saul to speak. However, Saul had no other clues either. He had just arrived today and wasn't familiar with this place. Besides discovering that there were indeed scale dragging marks on the ground, he had no other ideas. Seeing that Saul had no other clues, Maria stood up. "All right, let's continue deeper to take a look." On the way, Maria told Saul that during her normal patrol, she had discovered that the third-rank wizard here hadn't responded for a day, and his signature left at the Sighing Wall had also disappeared. She had quickly had her subordinates contact all the wizards guarding wizard towers to see if anyone else had lost contact. The good news was that currently only one third-rank wizard was missing, but the bad news was that according to intelligence, that missing third-rank wizard should have been in the wizard tower. Losing contact under such circumstances meant the other party was very likely in grave danger. The group activated defensive magic while descending the stairs. When they reached the final floor, Maria, who was walking at the front, stopped again. Saul hadn't yet turned the final stair corner when he heard Maria sigh and say, "Found his body." Saul quickened his pace and saw a corpse lying at the bottom of the staircase. The body looked as if it had been gnawed by wild beasts, with bones exposed in many places. The eaten areas are mostly parts with more flesh and fat. The internal organs are all gone too, another second-rank wizard said. His face was somewhat pale. Obviously an enemy that could devour a third-rank wizard could easily devour him as well. Saul approached and saw Maria crouch down again to examine the body. He also took the opportunity to observe. The dead third-rank wizard was thin, with only his thighs, buttocks, and abdomen having much flesh gnawed away. His arms and chest ribs showed little change, only some scratches. The flesh from the deceased's cheeks had also been bitten off, exposing his teeth, but his forehead had no wounds. Following his gaze to the empty abdomen, the internal organs protected by the ribs had all been hollowed out, leaving only an empty, bloody cavity. Maria stood up, cleaned the blood from her hands, and furrowed her brow even tighter. Her two slender eyebrows almost seemed ready to tangle together. From the bite marks on the edges, these are human teeth. The other wizards in the room instantly fell silent. Humans? Could it be that some wizard has mutated? Maria's facial skin was taut. The black tide is about to strike. I hope it's not some wizard causing trouble at this time. Maria sealed and stored the corpse. We'll take the body back to the sighing wall first. I remember someone there specializes in retrospective magic and can deduce the death scenario. Also, we need to find another wizard to guard this tower. This is almost the front line. Only third-rank wizards can guard here, who would be willing to come at short notice. A nearby second-rank wizard said with difficulty. At this time, Saul raised his hand and said quietly, I can temporarily fill in. Chapter 925, Guarding One Tower. Naturally, she was happy to have someone guard this place immediately. This was one of the outermost wizard towers, responsible for intercepting the most powerful black tide monsters, so dispatching a third-rank wizard to guard here was actually quite difficult work. But she was also somewhat worried. After all, the mission here was heavy and more dangerous. However, thinking of how Saul had easily dealt with the big-head monster fish earlier, Maria felt Saul's capabilities should be fine. She just worried that he didn't understand the situation here. After all, he wasn't a wizard of the Sighing Wall. Would he be willing to take on the most dangerous and troublesome work when the black tide struck? Considering Saul's identity, Maria still decided to tell Saul all the problems and let him decide for himself. Who would have thought that after hearing this, Saul showed no hesitation, no problem. However, I'm only temporarily guarding. After the black tide passes, I need to return to the borderland. You'll still need to replace me with another third-rank wizard. Maria breathed a huge sigh of relief. No problem. It's just that time is too tight now. I was afraid we couldn't dispatch someone quickly enough. It's wonderful that you're willing to help. The other three wizards also looked delighted. Having someone voluntarily take on the most difficult work naturally made things much easier for them. Maria thought for a moment, then pulled Saul aside and deliberately used secret speech magic to tell him, Saul, there's something I need to warn you about beforehand. When the black tide strikes this time, this place should be the front line of the defensive battle. Your master, Lord Gorsa, he probably won't participate in the battle. It was precisely considering that Lord Gorsa wouldn't act this time that Lord Murphy dispatched a quite capable third-rank wizard here. We just didn't expect. Saul was startled for a moment, but then immediately understood. His master wanted to follow into the abyssal eye when the black tide receded. The danger there was countless times greater than the black tide defensive battle. Since his master had no confidence in returning alive, naturally, he had to preserve his strength. But after a moment of silence, Saul still didn't change his mind. I understand. I will guard this place. Looking at Saul, Maria felt warmth in her heart and somewhat wanted to hug this young yet brave little wizard. If they were really counting ages, she could be his great-great-grandmother. However, Maria also had important work and couldn't replace Saul. I'll assign you a wizard apprentice who's most familiar with this place. If you have any needs, you can come find me. Saul readily agreed, all right. Also, I'd like to bring my friend Kelly to guard together. She's a very capable second-rank wizard. Is that okay? Of course, no problem. Maria naturally agreed. If it weren't for the shortage of high-rank wizard personnel, she would have wanted to assign Saul another guard. After all, this was his first time guarding a wizard tower in Storm Sea. She didn't know if he could adapt to the battles here. Maria had already secretly decided that when the black tide truly came, if she had the energy, she would pay more attention to the situation here. Help where she could. Then let's go back together. To guard the wizard tower here, you need to leave your signature at the sighing wall, otherwise you can't activate all the tower's functions. After going around in circles, they still had to return to the sighing wall. But this would also allow him to bring Kelly over. He just didn't know if being so close to Master Gorsa would make Kelly nervous enough to shake her legs. The return journey had no further incidents. No wizards went missing, and no black tide monsters that shouldn't appear at this time showed up. The 5 people escorted the dead third-rank wizard's corpse back to the sighing wall. This dead wizard apparently had quite a reputation, so when others saw the corpse, there was an uproar. Although Maria's announcement of the death caused some commotion, it also served to make everyone tense up to prevent further disappearances. After handing the corpse over to a wizard skilled in retrospective death cause analysis, Maria led Saul to a 3-story building located at the corner of the sighing wall. This building seemed to be the sighing wall's communication center. The people inside moved hurriedly, coming in to exchange information before quickly leaving again. Maria led Saul straight to the 3rd floor. Unlike the 1st and 2nd floors with their numerous workstations, the 3rd floor was a completely open, spacious hall. In the center of the hall was a crystal wall. One side of the crystal wall had dense golden patterns that looked somewhat like circuit boards. The other side was inscribed with many complex patterns, most of which had a wizard's name beneath them. This was the place Maria had mentioned where signatures needed to be left, so that the wizard towers in Storm Sea would recognize their masters. Maria stepped forward and gently moved her hand on the side covered with names. The text and patterns on the crystal wall began moving left and right like a phone screen, and could be enlarged or reduced according to her gestures. Soon, Maria skillfully found the pattern for the wizard tower that would belong to Saul. The space below the pattern was blank. There should originally have been a 3rd-rank wizard's name there, but after that person's sudden death, the name had disappeared. Saul noticed that to the right of this pattern was another similar but different pattern, and below that pattern was Master Gorsa's signature. His master's signature was elegant and graceful, looking just like his persona, like his disguise. Maria enlarged the space reserved for Saul's signature, then stepped aside. Saul, you just need to use your magical power to sign your name here. This crystal hub will transmit your magical power characteristics to the corresponding wizard tower. During this time, the wizard tower will be completely open to you. When you leave, just come back and erase the name. All right. Saul stepped forward, just about to sign his name, when he was suddenly stopped. Wait a moment. Murphy's figure instantly appeared between Saul and the crystal wall. Lord Murphy, Maria immediately bowed respectfully. The other wizards on the 3rd floor also immediately stopped their work and faced Murphy. Don't mind me, Murphy said with a chuckle. Continue with your work. Only then did the others turn back to resume their work. Murphy patted Saul's shoulder. You're only temporarily guarding for a month. No need to sign your name. Saul said nothing. He felt it wouldn't be such a simple reason. All right, Murphy shrugged like an old child. Actually, your mental power and magical power are too dominating. If you sign your name, no one here will be able to enter that wizard tower for a short time. That's fine then. As long as I can get through the door, I can try to make the wizard tower obey on my own. Saul didn't mind. Maria had said that without signing, he couldn't use the wizard tower's complete functions, probably referring to the tower's built-in defensive arrays. Saul didn't really need those anyway. As for Kelly, if there was real danger, he could just have her hide in the Chaos Realm first. That's no problem. We definitely won't shortchange you. I'll have Haley cooperate with you in guarding the second wizard tower. Although he's only a third-level wizard apprentice, he's lived at the Sighing Wall since childhood and has assisted many wizards. He's an excellent child. It's just a pity his talent is lacking. He's never been able to advance to true wizard. Saul had no objections. He nodded, but from the corner of his eye he saw Maria's mouth hanging open, as if she had heard something incredible. Why such surprise? Does Haley have some special status? Murphy laughed. No, they're all wizards and apprentices of the Sighing Wall. What could be special about that? Chapter 926, Standing Corpses. The other party looked quite young, probably not yet 30 years old. Such talent was still considered decent among ordinary wizards. Why did Wizard Murphy say his talent was lacking, and he couldn't become a true wizard? Hello, Lord Saul. In the coming days, I will cooperate with you to do our defensive work well. Haley had no expression on his face and looked somewhat rigid. Saul secretly compared Murphy and Haley's appearances. The two didn't look similar. They probably weren't blood relatives. Good, I'll be troubling you in the time ahead, Saul said politely. Haley bowed to Maria and Wizard Murphy, then said to Saul, if you have no other matters, let's go directly to the second wizard tower. Quite an eager fellow. I still need to bring along a friend. This wizard apprentice seemed to have some pride deep down. Saul was truly curious about the other party's identity now. Moreover, he noticed that Haley hadn't signed his name below the second wizard tower either. Could the other party use the facilities in the second wizard tower without signing? With Maria's help, Saul quickly found Kelly, who was still helping out on the Sighing Wall. Kelly was naturally willing to guard the wizard tower in Storm Sea together with Saul, even though once the battle began, it would become very dangerous there. Kelly had already changed back into black wizard robes, only with an added layer of fur trim at the edges, very similar to the local wizard's robes. This was Kelly's first time passing through the Sighing Wall to reach Storm Sea. Although the sea surface had no waves, overhead the wind blew clouds about, and the sky was dark and gloomy, as if enemies might appear the next second. This place is like two different worlds from inside the wall. Kelly followed beside Saul, gazing at the vast sea. It feels like fighting could break out at any moment here. It's quite different from the situation in the borderland too. The borderland still has some ordinary people, here there are none. Saul told Kelly about encountering monsters at sea earlier. During this time, if we act separately in the Storm Sea, you need to be careful. The Bone Dragon can't be brought here. The Bone Dragon coming to the wizard world would already activate its inherent pollution attributes. On land it was manageable, but in this Storm Sea filled with black tide pollution, it would be like carrying a candle into a powder magazine. One careless moment could cause an explosion. Kelly nodded like a little squirrel. Definitely not. I took a long time to recover from the aftereffects last time. Controlling the Bone Dragon while using radiation magic to resist pollution was quite a burden for Kelly. The two were communicating using secret speech magic. Haley glanced at them but said nothing. Halfway there, Saul discovered another black tide monster, very weak, barely reaching first rank level. The monster seemed to see they had 3 people and didn't actively attack, but Saul sensed its aura and directly solved it with a soul blade. Then little algae appeared, fishing in the water for a long time before returning wet, sighing and shaking its head. Saul laughed. I told you gray bones are very rare drops. It's normal not to find any. Haley's attention was immediately drawn to little algae. A rare surprised expression appeared on his face. Lord Saul, your pet isn't afraid of black tide pollution. Saul curved his fingers to scratch little algae's chin. Little algae was much thinner now, so he could only scratch precisely. It's not afraid. It grew up soaking in black tide pollution. Haley's eyes widened, and his gaze toward Saul was different now. He was a wizard born at the Sighing Wall who had seen high-rank wizards' battles since childhood. Even knowing Saul was a third-rank wizard from the borderland, he didn't find it particularly special. He even thought third ranks from the borderland were all fed by the Stargate Council and Tribunal and couldn't compare at all with third-rank wizards from the Sighing Wall. But he hadn't expected that even Saul's pet could fearlessly face black tide pollution. You should know that with the black tide about to arrive and pollution levels high in the sea, even some second-rank wizards were unwilling to enter the seabed. Yet Saul's pet dared to, and he said it grew up soaking in black tide pollution. Even if these words were somewhat exaggerated, they must be partially true. Saul didn't know that Haley looked at him with new respect because of little Algie, nor did he care about an apprentice's opinion. It was just that this apprentice's identity seemed somewhat special, and they would have to fight in the same wizard tower in the future, so he remained fairly gentle with him. By the way, Haley, Wizard Maria kept saying only signatures could tame the wizard towers in Storm Sea. Are these wizard towers alive? Saul asked. Not alive, dead, Haley answered. The wizard towers here are different from the Glare families. They use giant hearts as wizard tower cores, but the towers here are constructed from sea monster corpses, with their cores being wizards who died in battle in the first black tide. The wizard tower you're going to now has a fourth-rank wizard as its core. Wow, Kelly exclaimed quietly. Yes, the cores of the several frontmost wizard towers in Storm Sea are all fourth-rank wizard corpses. Only they could stand firm in the black tide for 100 years without falling. Although Haley showed no expression, you could see his mood was heavy. Lord Saul, you might not know the history of the Sighing Wall. After Deseto continent was swallowed by the Abyssal Eye, people from other continents panicked. It was the first time facing the black tide, and to prevent Stat continent from also being corroded and swallowed, Far North City temporarily established a defensive camp. However, although so many wizards participated in resisting the black tide, Stat still nearly fell. Haley raised his hand to gesture at a range. You see, before the black tide appeared, Stat continent actually extended all the way to here. But after that black tide, the continent disappeared until it was blocked by Lord Murphy's Sighing Wall, and only then did the black tide stop corroding. No wonder the far north ended up becoming an acute angle. Saul shook his head. He couldn't imagine now what kind of feelings the wizards back then had when they first saw the black tide. It's hard to imagine so many fourth-rank wizards died in battle at this place back then. Kelly was also full of emotion. Now when she looked at the slender wizard towers around them, her feelings were completely different. Those straight tower bodies, weren't they warriors who had stood here since 100 years ago? Yes, sacrificing themselves for others. It's hard to imagine wizards known for their selfishness would do such things. Saul was also thinking silently. Yes, Haley said quietly, such powerful wizards, why did they have to die at the very front? At this time, the second wizard tower that Saul was going to had appeared before them, and Master Gorse's first wizard tower also showed a vague outline on the horizon. In a trance, those two wizard towers seemed to become two tall giants, backs to Stat, faces toward the Abyssal Eye. Haley's voice sounded. Lord Saul, the wizards who died here all left part of their souls in the Sighing Wall, so when you sign at the Crystal Hub, you'll gain temporary control of the wizard tower. Wizard Murphy didn't let me sign. Saul remembered how he had suddenly appeared between him and the Crystal Hub. Such an action was clearly preventing him from signing. Saul had been aware of it then, and now hearing Haley explain the wizard tower's history and their relationship with the Sighing Wall made him feel even stranger. Murphy didn't want him to sign at the Crystal Hub. Why? Chapter 927, The Wizard Tower's History. The defensive array that Maria had set up earlier still enveloped this wizard tower, The half-open door had been closed. "Lord Saul, Lady Kelly, please wait here for a moment. I'll go in and activate the wizard tower. Since Lord Saul hasn't signed at the Crystal Hub, I need to act as an intermediary to control the wizard tower." Haley stepped forward, gave the door a gentle push to open it, then walked into the darkness. Kelly moved closer. "Do you think he has some relationship with Wizard Murphy? Otherwise, how could a wizard apprentice seem to know everything and even operate wizard towers?" "I suspect." Saul looked at the slender, towering wizard tower before him. "He might be a descendant of the fourth-rank wizard who died here." Saul had noticed that when Haley spoke about the fourth-rank wizards who died here, he didn't speak as an outsider. Inside the wizard tower, Haley earnestly cast an illumination spell. Such a zero-rank spell was something almost any apprentice could do. But his spell had a different effect in this wizard tower. The pale white light suddenly left his palm and drifted forward like a firefly. Haley quickly followed it downstairs to the bottom floor, where the third-rank wizard had died. The light floated around here for a while. Haley smiled bitterly. "You want to tell me about the last third-rank wizard's cause of death, but I can't understand either." The light gave up and continued drifting forward. Haley muttered to himself as he walked alone in the wizard tower, appearing much more relaxed. "We can only wait for Lady Maria's investigation results. I hope it won't affect the Black Tide in a few days." With the Black Tide's arrival imminent, the sudden death of a third-rank wizard could easily cause chaos. Fortunately, the Sighing Wall now had 2 fourth-rank wizards stationed there, or the wizards guarding the rear towers would be in a panic. He entered the uncleaned laboratory. The things here would be sealed and handed over to the Sighing Wall. Since the dead wizard hadn't designated an inheritance beneficiary, the materials and supplies he left in the laboratory would later be distributed to other wizards as rewards for guarding the Sighing Wall. Haley didn't even glance at the materials that would be highly valuable to him, walking straight to the innermost part of the room. In this modest-sized laboratory, a small room had been separately partitioned off. The room wasn't locked. Haley easily pushed open the partition door. There was nothing inside except for a 1-meter-tall crystal pillar. Looking closely, this crystal pillar's material was similar to the central crystal at the Sighing Wall. The light entered the crystal pillar, which glowed faintly. Then Haley stepped forward, placed his hand on the pillar's cross-section, and injected magical power. The next second, the entire crystal pillar began glowing, directly illuminating the whole partition. Then, like a spark igniting a prairie fire, the entire wizard tower lit up bit by bit from the bottom floor. Haley didn't linger, letting the light behind him sway as he turned and quickly returned to the tower top. The entrances to wizard towers in Storm Sea were all at the top. "Lord Saul, Lady Kelly, the wizard tower has been activated. You may enter now." Saul turned to Kelly. "See, he's like he's holding the switch key to this wizard tower." Then Saul stepped forward into the wizard tower. This was his second time entering this wizard tower today, and it felt different from before. Previously, following behind Maria, he had toured around like a tourist. This time he had become a temporary tenant. No matter how long he stayed, he had temporarily become the master of this place. Thinking that the wizard towers here were jointly constructed from Black Tide monsters and dead fourth-rank wizards, Saul couldn't help but reach out to touch the walls beside him as he descended the stairs. He only casually touched the wall, but suddenly discovered that Haley in front of him and Kelly behind him had vanished in an instant. An illusion is the consequence of not signing at the Crystal Hub that entering the wizard tower produces illusions. Saul wasn't unfamiliar with illusions. "Penny, see where the source of this illusion is." "Sure thing." The silver butterfly danced gracefully, flying 2 circles around Saul before saying strangely, "Huh, How is the illusion coming from you, brother Saul? Me? Saul pointed at himself in surprise, but before he could ask, he suddenly felt something sliding down behind him. He quickly turned around and was shocked to see a black scaled tail extending down from the top entrance. That black tail was like a python's tail, half a meter in diameter, rolling and sliding down the stairs, leaving drag marks on the ground. Looking at the traces on the ground, Saul immediately thought of the friction marks he had discovered when he first entered this wizard tower. Not mermaids, snakes. Seeing that thick tail swinging toward him, Saul neither dodged nor avoided, just standing in place watching. Then the tail with sharp scales pierced through Saul's body and continued rapidly extending downstairs. Saul turned to look below. The tail that had passed through his body was completely unaffected. It was indeed an illusion, and a harmless one at that. Could it be that I'm seeing the Wizard Tower's history? Isn't this Nightmare Butterfly's ability? It's not my doing, brother Saul. I know, Saul quickly chased down. Maybe it's not that I want to see history, but that this Wizard Tower wants to show me its past. Saul suddenly became excited. If this Wizard Tower truly had consciousness, would it show him the killer of the third-rank wizard? Saul had just descended halfway when he suddenly saw the tail that had been drilling downward coming back up, and the tail's end was coiled 3 times around. It had actually wrapped around a person. That person was unmistakably the third-rank wizard who had died at the bottom of the tower. At this time he was still alive, still struggling, but something seemed wrong with his body. His limbs moved with very small amplitude, yet his expression looked very strained, as if his body wasn't obeying him. That black tail had been carefully holding the wizard during the dragging process, as if afraid of hurting him. Could it be that this snake isn't the killer? In the historical illusion, Saul couldn't use magical power, but he didn't care. He widened his eyes and quickly followed the tail and third-rank wizard upward. Was the attacker standing outside the door right now? Saul quickened his pace, reaching the tower top before the tail. However, when he came outside the wizard tower, he still didn't see the killer. That black-scaled tail actually extended all the way from the tower top into the sea. Such a long tail, Saul sighed, then jumped down from the high tower without hesitation. However, the next second, he was back inside the wizard tower, and Haley and Kelly appeared beside him again. Kelly was still walking down when she noticed Saul suddenly stop and quickly brake to avoid hitting his back. What's wrong? Kelly keenly noticed that Saul's emotions had suddenly changed. Haley, who had been walking ahead, heard the sound and also stopped and turned around. However, Saul had no time to explain. He directly returned to the tower top, stood at the door's edge, and looked down at the sea surface. The waves gently yet persistently lapped at the bottom of the wizard tower. The polluted seawater made it difficult for mental power to penetrate very deep. From Saul's current observation range, there was no monster with an extremely long snake tail at the seabed. But just now in the wizard tower's past, Saul had indeed seen the tail. He tugged at his collar, stored his outermost robe, then leaped down into the seemingly calm sea. Chapter 928, Secrets Hidden Beneath the Sea. His ordinary clothing was immediately corroded and became tattered. Saul didn't activate any defensive arrays and directly transformed into a black skeleton, only wrapping the skin below his left wrist with magical power. Having the storage device on my wrist is still somewhat inconvenient. He swam toward the bottom of the wizard tower while thinking. If the pollution in the sea exceeds my tolerance, or if it gets damaged in battle, the space inside might be affected. It would be fine if the things inside just fell out, but if they're directly damaged due to spatial deformation, that would be a huge loss. Although there was much pollution in the black water, it couldn't compare to the seawater near the abyssal eye. Saul took out the mermaid's tear and the nearby seawater immediately moved closer to him. The pollution in the sea was diluted, and relatively pure seawater enveloped Saul, allowing him to focus on observing the underwater scenery. Saul turned and swam toward the bottom of the wizard tower. He saw that below the wizard tower was connected to a rock layer, which was equally slender, extending deep into the invisible darkness of the seabed. It was as if the fourth-rank wizard who had died here in battle had barely managed to preserve this tiny bit of continental land beneath him. Other places had been ruthlessly taken away by the black tide. Approaching the rock layer, Saul discovered some of the same scale scraping marks on it, extending downward along the rock layer. Saul followed the traces on the rock wall and continued descending. Crunch, crunch, crunch. He suddenly heard clear chewing sounds, as if something was feasting ahead. Saul quickly followed the sound, but discovered that the corner where the sound originated was still just a pile of rocks, without the snake tail he had seen in the past. Seeing that the wizard tower's foundation was bottomlessly deep, Saul didn't rush to continue sinking. This place was very far from the coastline, not a shallow sea area like the Red Sea. So Saul took out his diary, letting the black lines permeate the underwater world before him. The dark world completely transformed into a black, white, and gray line structure. Then Saul clearly saw two lines appear before him. One meandered downward, while the other came from the wizard tower overhead. That wasn't Kelly's or Haley's line. It was intermittent yet as thick and strong as a steel cable. That was a line belonging to the wizard tower overhead. Does the wizard who died here still have autonomous consciousness remaining? So he guided me to see the scene of the third-rank wizard being ambushed. The scene only showed the third-rank wizard being dragged away by the snake tail, but not how his corpse returned to the wizard tower. Was it because I left the range of the wizard tower's perceptible past, so I automatically disconnected? Just as Saul was pondering the autonomous consciousness contained in the wizard tower, he discovered that the other meandering downward line that had just appeared before him had vanished. Saul went deeper for a while and used the diary again, but still had no success. Deciding to temporarily give up the search, Saul put away the diary and began ascending. On the sea surface, Kelly was treading the undulating waves, waiting for Saul to come up. Saul had just jumped into the sea without explaining anything to her, which left Kelly confused. She didn't know what she should do and could only wait here. Fortunately, Saul returned quickly. His body began growing muscles and skin the moment he surfaced, so Haley, who was waiting for Saul at the wizard tower, couldn't see any changes in Saul at all. Only Kelly, standing on the sea surface, could vaguely see only slender black bones beneath the water. Kelly quickly put the outer robe Saul had given her on him. Although Saul appeared to be wearing clothing that transformed directly from black bones might only be an illusion. Saul put on the robe. "Let's go up and talk." Kelly tried hard to keep a straight face and flew back up to the wizard tower with Saul. Haley was also puzzled. Why had this third-rank wizard suddenly run out and jumped into the sea halfway down the stairs? This made him internally harbor a few more doubts. Does this wizard tower have consciousness? You said the core is a fourth-rank wizard who died in battle here. Are their souls still in the tower? Haley was stunned for a moment. He didn't know how Saul had discovered this. Clearly, many third-rank wizards only gradually realized that the wizard towers in Storm Sea actually had some consciousness after residing in them for several years. "Yes, Lord Saul, how did you discover it?" Saul pointed at the tower spire behind Haley. "It told me. Moreover, it's also trying to tell me who the killer of the third-rank wizard is." Because of Saul's discovery, Maria came again with others. After learning that Saul had seen from the wizard towers past a strange creature with a long serpentine tail hiding beneath the sea, She personally examined the seabed. She reached the same conclusion as Saul. The scale marks that appeared inside the wizard tower were consistent with the traces on the underwater rock pillar. Although they still hadn't found the killer, Maria seemed to have some clues. After thanking Saul and saying it would be counted toward his merits, she hurriedly left again. After seeing Maria leave unwilling to say more, Saul and Kelly exchanged glances, feeling that the other party might still be hiding some secret matters from them. When you mentioned the snake tail, Maria was fine, but one of the wizards behind her seemed to remember something, though she quickly suppressed the emotional change. Kelly quietly told Saul. It had to be said that Kelly's observation was very detailed. She thought Saul would be watching Maria, so she focused her attention on the others. If not for this, she wouldn't have captured that fleeting emotional change. No rush. We still have to stay here for a month. There will always be opportunities to learn what we want to know. Saul raised his hand, stopping Penny's attempt to secretly follow them. Kelly smiled proudly, raising her fair little chin. Don't worry, they can't hide anything from me. Haley didn't know about their conversation. He didn't seem very concerned about the dead third-rank wizard either. His attention was almost entirely focused on the wizard tower. Next, Saul and Kelly each occupied an empty room as their temporary residence for the coming month. I should have canceled the hotel room. Coming out of her room, Kelly suddenly clapped her hands. It's fine. The hotel isn't expensive. We might still return to Far North City during this time, and we'll need a place to stay. Saul tried again to touch the wizard tower's walls, but this time he couldn't continue viewing the tower's history. What do we do next? Just wait for the black tide to strike, Kelly asked. You make magic scrolls first, Saul said seriously. As many as possible. Inertization Formula 1s, alpha radiation 1s. You're skilled at all of these. When the black tide strikes, the magical power in the air will also be affected. Rather than using magic crystals to replenish magical power, it's better to make some immediately effective attack scrolls to handle intensive combat. Kelly nodded but puffed out her cheeks. The spells you mentioned are all quite expensive. Gray bone fragments suddenly appeared in Saul's palm. He tossed the gray bones a couple times. This stuff seems quite valuable here. I'll go get more and try to break even. Chapter 929, Tracking. The ordinary people here acted as if they didn't know about the black tide at all. Saul changed into ordinary clothes and walked down the street, randomly finding a grain shop. The black tide is coming. Aren't you all leaving? Although Saul had restrained his magical power and hadn't revealed his identity, the middle-aged man who had lived in Far North City for many years still recognized Saul's identity through experience. My lord, we've always lived here and our livelihoods are all here. If we had to move every time the black tide came, we couldn't keep our shops running. The merchant smiled carefully yet warmly. Besides, with the wizard lords protecting the far north, we're not worried at all. Really, the Sighing Wall has never been breached. This is my first time here and you all seem very confident. It's not exactly confidence. Lord Murphy has always been stationed at the Sighing Wall. He's the longest-living fourth-rank wizard still alive. As long as he's there, no enemy can break through the Sighing Wall. The merchant gripped his scale. Besides, if the Sighing Wall really were breached, it would be the same no matter where we fled. The merchant finally put down his scale. If the Sighing Wall can't stop the black tide, my lord, wizards like you could still escape to other continents, but we could only disappear along with the far north. It seemed the merchants of the far north weren't completely unconcerned. It was just that whether they worried or not couldn't affect the arrival of danger. Like if the end of the world really came, most people could only lie flat and wait for death. Fortunately, Saul now had a certain ability to contend with fate. Even if Stat Continent and Nefrit Continent were swallowed by the Abyssal Eye in the most extreme circumstances, He was determined to survive in the Black Tide's ocean. But what use was living alone in solitude? He still needed a wizard world rich in spiritual pursuits and full of twists of fate as his foundation. Otherwise, what would he rely on to advance to fourth rank? How could he advance to fifth rank in the future? Much knowledge truly couldn't be researched and understood through individual effort alone. So, the Sighing Wall couldn't fall, and Stat Continent couldn't disappear. Saul turned back to look at the gray giant wall that towered into the clouds, blocking the sea wind and polluted air. His heart stirred slightly. The wizard towers in Storm Sea are constructed from high-rank wizard corpses and Black Tide monsters. What about the Sighing Wall? What materials is it made of? Its core? That goes without saying. It must be Wizard Murphy. A fourth-rank wizard guarded the Sighing Wall. If Saul still couldn't find a suitable fourth target during this time, perhaps he could consider Wizard Murphy or Wizard Maria. Wizard Murphy is tied to the entire Sighing Wall. He might not be willing to cooperate with me. If the target rejects it, the Symphony of Fate can't absorb the fate power they generate. However, Wizard Maria is quite possible. Her strength is decent, and she's an important figure at the Sighing Wall, but she's clearly in the midst of one of fate's twists and turns. The monster hidden beneath the sea, the suddenly dead wizard, and the looming Black Tide. All these events can provide considerable amounts of destiny power. Having a backup target, Saul was also worried that the fourth target might wither away. Although targets could be changed, it would still affect the entire Symphony of Fate. Before making a selection, it was best to ensure the target's survivability. Earlier at Master Gorsa's place, if he hadn't had such a good relationship with his master, Saul wouldn't have wanted to choose someone very likely to die as a target. Even now, he was still very worried about Master Gorsa. He just understood that he couldn't stop the other party, so he could only choose to provide help and support. After wandering the streets to understand the locals' views on the Black Tide, Saul prepared to first return to the hotel to pack up the things he'd left there, then go hunt the Black Tide monsters that had already emerged around Storm Sea. Maria had said that the stronger the Black Tide monsters, the more likely they were to drop gray bones. Saul believed that as long as he killed enough of them, he could have decent gains. But just as Saul was still maintaining his ordinary appearance and preparing to return to the hotel, he suddenly saw a somewhat familiar figure at the hotel entrance. Saul immediately stopped and half-turned to look at an herb stall nearby. "What herbs are these?" Saul asked while using his peripheral vision to track that somewhat familiar figure. It was the second-rank wizard who always followed behind Maria, the one who had briefly shown surprise when hearing about the black snake tail. If this were in Storm Sea, Saul definitely wouldn't hide from him and would instead go forward to greet him. But now, he was seeing this second-rank wizard in a civilian area of far North City. Moreover, this second-rank wizard, like Saul, had restrained his aura and disguised himself as an ordinary person. The other party had even changed his build and appearance, but such disguise was completely inadequate in Saul's eyes. The other party came out of the hotel carrying an ordinary-looking suitcase, but faint magical fluctuations emanated from his chest. These magical fluctuations were very subtle but couldn't fool Saul, who had been watching him. Spatial-type magical fluctuations. He just entered the hotel and either took something out of or put something into a spatial tool, then quickly left. Because his movements were swift, the spatial tool's fluctuations haven't completely dissipated. Saul multitasked, buying a small bundle of hemostatic herbs while following the departing second-rank wizard. The other party put something in. Saul walked in the shadows. There were many pedestrians on the street, and the person being tracked wasn't looking around either. The other party definitely couldn't imagine that he would encounter Saul here by chance. The diary in Saul's soul body showed no changes, but he could feel fate power correcting his route. Did the feedback of fate power make me encounter what I wanted to encounter? Saul looked down and smiled. Could I learn the secrets of the snake tail from him? Although this thing couldn't affect Saul, it was related to Maria, so Saul still needed to investigate thoroughly. On the bustling street, the person being tracked never discovered anyone following him. He went all the way to the sighing wall, then entered a shop before approaching it, afterward emerging in his original appearance. Saul had long since tethered him with fate lines. No matter what he looked like, Saul could recognize him. Next, this wizard passed through the sighing wall and entered Storm Sea. This person hurriedly went to the hotel in Far North City and returned to Storm Sea. What exactly is he trying to do? Outside Storm Sea, there were no obstructions around. Saul directly slid into the sea along the wall's shadows like a swimming fish, following the other party at a moderate distance. Finally, that second-rank wizard arrived at a wizard tower far from the sighing wall. Although this tower was near the edge, it was at a lower latitude, close to the bottom corner of Far North City's acute angle shape. It was a relatively safe sea area, with many wizard towers in front of it. The wizard tower here looked a size smaller than the second wizard tower, but there were more of them and they weren't far from each other. Saul noticed that most of these wizard towers had no wizards stationed in them. Makes sense. Being in such a remote location, it would be difficult for black tide monsters to reach here. It would be more effective to defend at the sighing wall. But this also meant this was an excellent private meeting location. Saul approached the tower base and watched the other party enter through the door at the tower top. Someone inside opened the door for him. How should I get in? Since it's a wizard tower in Storm Sea, violent destruction would defeat the purpose of tracking and eavesdropping. Saul began thinking about how to enter. Using fate lines to observe, the observation would be blurry and might not be clear. Having Nightmare Butterfly enter, if there were third-rank wizards or second-rank wizards with strong mental power inside, it might be discovered. Infiltrating himself, he might trigger the wizard tower's defensive arrays. As Saul was thinking this, his arm touched the wizard tower's wall. In an instant, his perspective shifted from outside the tower to inside. Chapter 930, The Living Tale. But although he was thinking about things, he was also clear that the piece of outer wall he had touched had no magical arrays on it. Could it be that this wizard tower has a teleportation mechanism? But he quickly negated his own guess. Because it was expensive. Even if they were to use one, it would only be used on the first and second wizard towers, not on a rear tower like this. Saul was currently standing in a dim stairwell. There were no lights in the stairs, only the room at the very bottom emitting weak light. At this time, he heard someone coming down from upstairs and immediately stepped back. But with just this movement, he suddenly discovered that half his body had actually melted into the wall. Saul stood still and didn't move again until the person on the stairs came down. The person coming down was exactly the second-rank wizard Saul had just been tracking. But he acted as if he couldn't see Saul at all and walked directly past him. Indeed, when I moved just now, I discovered that what moved was consciousness, not the body. So what I'm seeing now, could it be the internal scenes of this wizard tower? This wizard tower clearly also had a wizard's corpse standing within it, and it was similarly showing Saul everything it had seen. Forget it, let me follow and see first. Saul emerged from the wall and brazenly followed the second-rank wizard down to the bottom floor. Delenn, why did you suddenly come over? There were 5 more people in the bottom floor room. 4 second ranks and even 1 third-rank wizard. Such a high-level configuration appeared in a remote, unmanned wizard tower. There was definitely a secret. Saul moved closer, as if he had always been a part of this place. We just received news that the monster that killed Abby is very likely Robin. Delenn had held it in the whole way and only showed a trace of panic in front of his own people. The third-rank wizard across from him widened his eyes. Robin, how is that possible? Didn't Maria personally kill him back then? Did Maria not act? Delenn quickly said, Impossible, Lord Benjamin. I was also present at the time. I personally watched Lady Maria burn Robin's corpse, burning it until only half the body remained. Only after confirming he was thoroughly dead did she throw him into the sea. Benjamin slowly narrowed his eyes. Only half the body, upper half or lower half. Even the head was burned away, so it must have been. Delenn opened his mouth wide, and only after several seconds continued his words. The lower half. So what killed Robin was actually a tail. Benjamin paced in place with his hands behind his back, his face showing visible unease. Even the third-rank wizard was uneasy, and the other second-rank wizards were even more panicked, showing traces of terror. Benjamin finally stopped packing and took a deep breath. The real monster is the tail we modified, growing from the tailbone. He slapped a metal experiment table, and the entire surface was immediately destroyed. Glass instruments and metal supports fell to the ground with a clatter, shattering into pieces. Benjamin looked at the mess on the ground, then suddenly raised his head. Go bring all the tails over. Delenn immediately took out a triangular accessory from his chest, sticking his finger directly into the accessory's interior. Then a brass box suddenly appeared in front of Delenn. The brass box was also wrapped in a sheepskin cover. The sheepskin was carved with dense miniaturized magical arrays. All sealing arrays. After Delenn took out the brass box, he immediately said, Lord Benjamin, Lord Maria asked me to bring these tails over. Benjamin nodded with satisfaction, casually sweeping the fragments on the ground to a corner and unscrewing his right ear in a circle. The inner ear revealed a metal carving knife, also covered with dense magical arrays. Then, as he crouched down and was about to open the box, he heard Delenn's next words. Asking you to completely destroy them all. Benjamin's movements immediately stopped. He raised his head, his eyes full of disbelief. Has Maria gone mad? She actually asked me to destroy the tails. Delenn was immediately shocked back 2 steps by the other party's intimidation, but he still tried to dissuade with difficulty. Lord Benjamin, these tails have already exceeded our control. The mature form even killed Lord Lawrence. Benjamin's hand that was about to touch the brass box slightly shrank back, but after hesitating for a moment, he still took the carving knife in his hand and forcefully cut open the sheepskin on the brass box. So what if the mature form killed Lawrence? The sheepskin melted like butter meeting fire tongs, dripping to the ground. Do you know how many materials and magic crystals we spent to make such a small box of tailbones? Without the sheepskin's restraint, the brass box suddenly shook violently once, then again. Delenn and the other second-rank wizards immediately retreated, leaving the 2-meter range around the brass box. Only Benjamin, being third rank, didn't retreat. He even opened the box's lid. A box full of gray bones appeared before his eyes. These gray bones were segment by segment, from thick to thin, only as long as a human index finger. Although they had no tendons and muscles connecting them, they could desperately jump around in the brass box, making the entire box ring with bang-bang sounds. The moment Benjamin opened the box, several tails stacked on top immediately jumped out of the brass box, seemingly wanting to escape. However, a pair of golden wings instantly grew from Benjamin's back, directly sweeping all the gray bones that had escaped the box back in. Looking carefully, those golden wings weren't made of feathers at all, but were giant wings composed of metal palms of varying lengths. The palm roots were all connected together, while each palm could also move flexibly within a limited range independently. It was these independently acting palms that caught the escaping tails back. Despite these tails desperately trying to escape, Benjamin had no intention of closing the box. His heart and eyes were full of the tails in the box, passionate and crazed. Don't you understand? How amazing are tailbones that can survive independently on the seabed for long periods. Seeing this scene, Delen's face looked somewhat ugly. Wizard Benjamin clearly had no intention of following Wizard Maria's instructions to destroy these tails. Delen was, after all, only a second-rank wizard. He knew that if he showed signs of reporting to Wizard Maria at this time, he would definitely be silenced. So, although he didn't agree with Wizard Benjamin's philosophy, he didn't rashly speak out in opposition. But Delen hadn't thought that even so, he still couldn't escape. Benjamin, who was pressing down the tails, suddenly raised his head and looked at Delen. Do you know why Robin's tail attacked Lawrence? Delen's heart raced wildly under the other party's eerie gaze. He wanted to run, but didn't dare turn his back on Benjamin. I don't know. His voice trembled somewhat. Benjamin's mouth slowly curved up, because it needs fresh flesh and blood to become a real tail, not just pure tailbone. Do you hear it? They're crying out in hunger. As soon as he finished speaking, the wings composed of palms surged again, grabbing toward the terrified Delen. To prevent Delen from telling Maria about what happened here, Benjamin actually struck first, wanting to tear Delen apart to feed the tailbones in the box. At this critical moment, more than 10 gray semi-transparent tentacles suddenly wrapped around Delen from behind and yanked him backward, allowing Delen to escape the attack range of the palm wings. Who? Benjamin shouted in surprise and gave the 4 second-rank wizards behind him a look. But before his eyeballs could turn back, a much thicker gray tentacle with a diameter of 1 meter suddenly slapped his face. A dignified third-rank wizard was actually slapped and sent flying to the opposite wall, even knocking down the 4 second-rank wizards behind him. Everything happened too fast. These high-rank wizards actually fell like bowling pins. Benjamin suffered the worst. When he angrily turned his head back, the right half of his face had already caved in deeply, his skin and flesh torn, revealing the golden bones inside. It's you. Despite half his face being twisted, Benjamin still clearly saw who had attacked him. It was Saul. Chapter 931, The Mystery of Gray Bones. And the Wizard Tower didn't stop Saul at all. It even automatically opened the door when he flew to the entrance, making it convenient for him to enter. After Saul saw everything happening inside through the Wizard Tower's own consciousness, he understood that the Wizard Tower was requesting his help. Help with what? Of course, to stop bad people from doing bad things. Clearly, the Wizard Tower's consciousness also believed that what Benjamin was about to do was wrong, that it would harm the Wizard Tower or the Sighing Wall. These wizards who had died in battle in Storm Sea over 100 years ago were still doing their utmost to save their homeland. After slapping Benjamin away, Saul lifted his foot and directly closed the brass box's lid, then stepped on it, firmly pinning the violently shaking metal box to the ground. His body slowly leaned forward, his elbow resting on the leg stepping on the box. He curved his lips, imitating Benjamin's twisted smile from earlier. This vulgar script ends here. We're fighting at the front lines so you can kill people at will in the rear. Saul half-turned his head to Delen. You, go invite both Maria and Wizard Murphy over. You should have some emergency distress signal, right? Delen nodded and quickly ran up the stairs. Benjamin cast magic trying to stop Delen. Blade hell. Instantly, countless sharp weapons appeared in the air. Needles, swords, knives, awls. These weapons emanated strong metallic elemental aura, and even the magical fluctuations they emitted were like blades, directly cutting small wounds on Saul's tentacles. Then these weapons split in two. A small portion chased after Delenn, while the majority rushed toward Saul like a violent storm. Saul didn't move. A large number of soul blades immediately appeared before him, instantly shattering all the metal swords attacking him, some even embedding directly into the wall behind. Benjamin raised a protective barrier, barely deflecting the weakened soul blades, but the 4 second-rank wizards behind him suffered terribly. Almost all were turned into pincushions. If Saul hadn't wanted to keep them alive for questioning, these people would probably have died under Saul's blades in just one exchange. Saul also intercepted most of the weapons attacking Delenn, with the remainder being dodged by Delenn himself. Seeing Delenn about to escape the wizard tower, Benjamin immediately became anxious. His hand suddenly plunged into the floor. However, when he raised his head, he was shocked to see Saul teleport in front of him, and then his face was covered by countless tentacles. Benjamin felt it was very shameful to be trapped by a fellow third-rank wizard. He had been holding back earlier, but now it seemed that even if he made a big commotion, he had to subdue Saul first. But just as Benjamin was about to make another move, he suddenly felt the tentacles restraining him split open hundreds of mouths internally. Then sharp teeth bit into his skin, ears, nose, and even bit through his eyelids, piercing into his eyeballs. Benjamin's movements suddenly stopped. It wasn't that Saul's attack had caused him any injuries, but he suddenly discovered that those tiny teeth biting him seemed to contain something terrifying. He had the illusion that he wasn't being entangled by tentacles, but being bitten by hundreds of venomous snakes on every inch of his skin. The venomous fangs had already pierced his skin, just waiting for the venom glands to secrete. But what was hidden in the tentacles' mouths wasn't snake venom glands. Benjamin had also fought at the Sighing Wall for decades. That aura emanating from the tentacles' mouths was all too familiar. It was the aura of black tide pollution. Rich, dark, twisted, carrying rampant pollution power. The more familiar a wizard was with the black tide, the more they understood its danger. So the moment Benjamin sensed this aura, he stopped moving, even withdrawing the hand he had extended underground. The other second-rank wizards didn't know what was happening to Benjamin. They had been severely injured by Saul and were lying on the ground. Seeing Benjamin being entangled by Saul's tentacles but not struggling, just sitting there obediently as if his soul and consciousness had been absorbed by Saul. The several people were terrified. Saul had actually controlled the powerful third-rank wizard Benjamin in just 2 exchanges, and they couldn't understand at all how Saul had done it. This point was more panic-inducing than Saul easily defeating Benjamin. Not moving anymore, Saul saw the wizard in front of him finally behave and used one tentacle to lift open the brass box. Strangely enough, the gray tailbones that had been jumping around lively in Benjamin's hands were very well behaved in front of Saul. They stayed obediently in the box, with not one wanting to jump out. When Saul had seen the gray tails in the box through the wizard tower earlier, he had been very curious about them. Now he could finally hold them and examine them properly. He looked down and took one tailbone from the box, then closed the box again and continued sitting on the brass box. The gray bone lay quietly in Saul's hand. Saul looked down at it twice, then took out another piece of gray bone from his storage device. These two things seemed to be the same type. Saul placed the gray bone fragment and tailbone together. The originally motionless tailbone suddenly snapped and struck, directly breaking the gray bone fragment in half. As it was about to continue attacking the gray bone fragment, Saul suddenly clenched his fist tightly. When he opened it again, both the gray bone fragment in his palm and the previously lively tailbone had become small pieces. Now they were almost indistinguishable from each other. Saul's mental power swept over and discovered something among the fragments. Then he extended a tentacle from Benjamin's body, transforming it back into a human arm. The diary appeared in his palm and instantly extracted a strand of white soul fragment from the gray bone pieces. So the tailbones were hiding incomplete souls. Saul had seen through the tailbone's secret. He raised his hand to look at the 4 second-rank wizards across from him who were silent as cicadas in winter. So, you were imitating black tide monsters and created new monsters. The second-rank wizard facing Saul directly was questioned until his whole body felt cold. He wasn't clear about Saul's attitude toward their experiments. If he answered poorly, he might be killed to vent anger. After all, there were 5 prisoners here. But if he didn't speak, he would become a useless prisoner. We just wanted to try whether we could transform people into structures similar to black tide monsters, thereby adapting to black tide pollution. So you killed monsters while also killing people. Saul rotated his wrist, letting the gray bone fragments in his palm gradually fall. That's not it. It's not like that, Saul. Saul turned his head and saw Maria leading Delenn appearing on the steps together. A shadow covered the upper half of her face, with only her red lips exposed under the light. Maria descended another step, finally standing completely in the light. She stared at Saul, her face showing some embarrassment but more sorrow. I once told you that wizards fighting at the Sighing Wall would collect gray bone fragments whenever possible, for researching the weaknesses of black tide pollution and black tide monsters. You also told me that someone once used gray bones for wizard body transformation and ultimately died from poor adaptation. Yes, but on this point I concealed something from you. A book about 10 centimeters thick appeared in Maria's hand. The book was very special. Each page was a bronze-colored metal sheet, fixed together with copper wire through drilled holes. Only the outside was a leather cover. After taking out the metal book, Maria somewhat reluctantly touched the cover, then raised her hand and threw it directly to Saul. In fact, the wizard who underwent gray bone transformation didn't die completely. After leaving this book behind, I severely wounded him. He didn't even have a head left, and his remains finally fell into the sea. And we couldn't resist the temptation. We opened the book he left behind, and now we've actually walked down his old path. Chapter 932, Poaching. Yes, Maria looked at the brass box that Saul was sitting on. But the tailbones have lost control. The long tail you saw was a wizard who once used gray bones for wizard body transformation and ultimately lost control. I killed him with my own hands. Maria's pupils reflected a burning figure. Only his tail, being immersed in seawater, hadn't burned. Only when the out-of-control Robin's corpse was almost completely burned did Maria release her grip and let him be swallowed by the sea. She just hadn't expected that the one escaping tail would gain independent consciousness and attack Lawrence. Tailbone transformation has been proven wrong. We must stop research and destroy all tailbones. Maria pointed at the brass box. Saul, can you hand them over to me, or I can personally destroy them right now in front of you. No need. Saul put down the book Maria had thrown over. He patted the box beneath him, the brass shell making a crisp sound. I think tailbone transformation is a good idea. Maria and Delenn exchanged glances, their eyes showing worry. The subdued wizard's eyes lit up, thinking they might not be executed after all. But Saul, you've also seen how terrifying out-of-control tailbones are. Lawrence was even eaten by it. Maria tried to persuade Saul. Maria, you've misunderstood one thing. Wizard body transformation is like the magic in our hands. It can save people or kill them, but what specific effects it produces depends on how we apply it. Since gray bone transformation brings loss of control, we just need to modify the transformation plan. When you said you couldn't resist temptation, you actually meant you couldn't resist the temptation of gray bones being able to survive in seas full of black tide pollution, right? Your fundamental purpose is still to fight the black tide and let people survive, isn't it? Wanting to perform gray bone transformation on wizards was to improve wizards' resistance to black tide pollution, allowing them to move freely in black tide pollution and survive in more extreme environments. This idea wasn't wrong. It was just that the current research results were unsatisfactory. There was still a chance to make changes. Maria understood Saul's meaning, but redesigning an extremely complex wizard body transformation plan, how could that be so easy? Saul, we've been researching gray bone transformation for 50 years. Tailbone transformation is already the most successful among the tens of thousands of wizard body transformation plans we've created. Gray bones aren't that easy to tame. Really? Saul smiled, suddenly thinking of the gray bones that lay obediently in his hands. Then let's make a deal. I'll help you improve tailbone wizard body transformation, and you join the Purity Wizard Tower. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone in the room fell silent, with only Benjamin, bound by Saul's tentacles, occasionally twitching. Does this count as poaching on someone's doorstep? Bate in the diary couldn't help but comment. Wasn't Shea also poached by Saul like this back then? Master, have you decided to make Wizard Maria your fourth target? Herman also asked from within the diary. Yes, Saul thought to himself. He wanted to give Maria some time to consider. Originally, I felt Maria's strength was decent, but her fate was too plain. She didn't have the ability to generate large amounts of destiny power. But now it seems she's not as honest as I previously thought. However, I don't need honest people either. Maria struggled for a long time, biting her lips. I'm sorry, Saul. I don't want to leave the Sighing Wall. You don't need to leave the Sighing Wall. If you join the Borderland, you'll be an envoy dispatched by the Borderland to assist with the Black Tide War at the Sighing Wall. Can it work like that? Delenn beside them couldn't help but comment. Of course it can, Saul smiled. You don't need to answer me hastily either. After this black tide passes, I'll start helping you improve the tailbone magic transformation plan. You can join the Purity Tower after getting the plan. With the Dead Wizard's Diary, improving a wizard body transformation plan was still quite easy. Saul felt it was very worthwhile to exchange such a plan for a third-rank wizard with years of black tide combat experience. Maria across from him was completely moved by Saul's sincerity, joining the other party's faction without leaving her own territory, while the other party also paid the reward first. All right, Maria nodded in agreement, though she also emphasized, once you provide a better gray bone wizard body transformation plan, I'll join the Purity Wizard Tower, and I can sign a contract with you. After joining the Purity Wizard Tower, I absolutely won't do anything detrimental to you. No need for a contract. I trust you. Saul waved his hand grandly, then confirmed in his mind that causality had taken effect. With causality in place, he wasn't worried about others going back on their word. With everyone reaching agreement, the tailbones would be handled by Saul first. Maria had been somewhat worried, but seeing the tailbones that should have been restless and constantly wanting to escape lying quietly in Saul's hands, she immediately insisted that Saul keep the tailbones. With the agreement reached, they escorted Benjamin and the other 4 second-rank wizards, preparing to see Wizard Murphy. Who would have thought that as soon as they stepped outside, they saw Wizard Murphy with his back to them, gazing at the distant sea. Lord Murphy, Maria said in surprise, I was just about to find you to explain about our private gray bone research. However, Murphy turned around and shook his head with a sigh. Forget it, Maria. You don't need to cover for me. Researching gray bones was my idea to begin with. You can't hide this from Saul. Maria's movement stiffened. Saul stepped forward. Yes, I guessed it too. At the Sighing Wall, what could escape Wizard Murphy's eyes? Moreover, with Wizard Maria's cautious personality, How would she conduct such dangerous experiments in Storm Sea without your permission? Maria glanced at Saul with a complex expression. Maria was afraid experimental failure would affect my reputation, so she wanted to take all responsibility on her own shoulders. Don't mind it. Saul shook his head. It's precisely because I admire Wizard Maria's character that I invited her to join the Purity Wizard Tower. This brought the matter of poaching into the open. Wizard Murphy wasn't surprised. I respect Maria's choice. Then Wizard Murphy took away Benjamin and the other 4 second-rank wizards. Although they were also conducting gray bone experiments, their unauthorized attempt to kill companions was absolutely unforgivable. Saul wasn't worried that Murphy would secretly release Benjamin and the others. Wizard Murphy informed Saul that he would imprison Benjamin and the 4 second-rank wizards at the frontmost wizard towers, having them perform defensive duties in the most dangerous places, until they died in battle. Saul could check on their status at any time. But at the same time, Wizard Murphy also gave Maria a task. Find and kill Robin's tail. That tail that had killed Lawrence should hide Robin's already mad soul inside. Chapter 933, Capturing the Long Tail. It wasn't until there were 7 days left before the calculated black tide arrival that Maria finally had someone deliver news of Robin's whereabouts. Although this clue wasn't a happy one. A second-rank wizard had died under Robin's tail's attack. After receiving the information, Saul first went to find Kelly. Kelly, how many inertization spell scrolls have you prepared? Kelly, sporting 2 dark circles under her eyes, squinted at Saul. 5. Give me one, I might need it today. It's on the first shelf over there. Get it yourself. Kelly buried her head and continued working. Last time when Saul went out and captured Benjamin, although Murphy hadn't said anything at the time, he had afterwards sent a large pile of resources to Saul and Kelly. It was obviously payment for Saul's services. So Saul no longer needed to deliberately hunt black tide monsters to collect gray bones, and he put more energy into research. These past days, he and Kelly had discussed and confirmed that gray bones indeed had a strong connection to the bone monsters of the Chaos Realm. When the black tide pollution in gray bones reached an upper limit, and they were then subjected to inertization, the highly polluted gray bones would turn into white bones. This also confirmed in reverse that the white bones in the Chaos Realm were basically corpses of creatures that had completely mutated in black tide pollution. So the Chaos Realm really might be that continent swallowed by the abyssal eye, Dissetto continent, which had already disappeared from this world. At the same time, Saul also thought that his ability to suppress gray bones and make them behave might come from the anchor point in his left hand. It was the only white bone among his entire black skeletal frame, and it couldn't be exposed outside his skin. As for how white bones or gray bones became anchor points, Saul hadn't figured that out yet. Perhaps Camus in the outer layer world of the Chaos Realm knew, but she would never tell Saul any useful information. Every time they met, she just spread the despair that the world's end was inevitable, causing Saul to not want to see her at all now. A waste of time. Taking the inertization scroll that Kelly had worked hard to create, Saul went out to meet with Maria. The location Maria had notified Saul about was in a Storm Sea area far from Wizard Towers. Obviously, Robin's tail had left the hunting range of the Sighing Wall Wizard Towers to avoid Maria's tracking. If this tail hadn't been driven by unbearable hunger to eat half of another second-rank wizard, Maria would probably have had to wait until after the black tide to conduct a large-scale hunt. The two quickly met in Storm Sea, where Maria was already waiting with Delenn. "How is it?" Saul approached and asked. The wizard who discovered Robin tracked him to here before losing his trail. I think Robin likely dove into the deep sea. I'm worried now whether he might transfer locations in the deep sea." Saul thought for a moment. Currently, it seems Robin's need to eat people has overcome his fear of you. To continue ambushing wizards, he won't go too far from here. Since we've confirmed he was in nearby waters, maybe I can find him. Saul opened his palm, revealing a compass. The compass had a white pointer in the center, with a rather rough exterior that looked hand-polished. This pointer was actually a white bone fragment that Saul had brought out from the Chaos Realm. To create the Bone Dragon, Saul's group had consumed nearly all the bone monsters, only keeping Saul's mount, the bone flying lizard, and a small amount of white bone fragments for backup research. Now Saul was using one piece to create a compass for tracking Robin. With the black tide approaching, the weather in Storm Sea was actually getting better and better. Sunlight shone on the sea surface, creating sparkling waves. The three of them also stood on the water surface, rising and falling with the ocean waves. All three looked down at the compass in Saul's palm, where the white pointer was like a lazy cat, casually moving its arms. Delenn beside them didn't dare raise his hand. He felt that Wizard Saul's compass seemed useless, but he didn't dare show it, lest the other party feel uncomfortable. But Saul actually felt that not finding anything immediately was normal. Otherwise, if Robin could be found so easily, how could Maria's previous search operations have been completely fruitless? "I think Robin might be hiding on the seabed." After waiting a while without any movement, Maria said, "Let me take the compass underwater. When there's movement, I'll signal to notify you." Who knew that Saul had no intention of handing the compass to Maria. He raised his hand, avoiding Maria's reaching hand. "I can go to deeper places." After speaking, Saul's face suddenly changed dramatically. The first thing to disappear was his skin, then his muscles, finally revealing black bones. His eyes showed two gray, misty lights. Maria and Delenn were both seeing Saul in this form for the first time and were slightly shocked. Although many wizards would perform wizard body transformations on themselves to varying degrees, few would transform so thoroughly. Saul withdrew the magical array beneath his feet and immediately fell into the sea. Putting away his robes, he made an agile turn in the water and swam toward the deeper parts of the ocean. This place was already far from the sighing wall, and the black tide was still days away from arriving. As soon as Saul entered 10 meters underwater, he felt the strong pollution he had experienced when diving extremely deep before. He took out the mermaid's tear to protect his left hand and the compass, then continued diving deeper. The ocean's pressure became increasingly obvious. Saul almost heard his bones making crack sounds, but the next second he felt that might just be an illusion. After all, his hands and feet remained intact. In the seabed where light couldn't penetrate, Saul could no longer see clearly what was in front of him. He carefully released his mental power while splitting off another strand of mental power to monitor his own condition. Two perspectives appeared in his consciousness space, like having a split personality. Finally, Saul sensed the white bone compass suddenly freeze, pointing due north after several swimming motions. Saul quickly adjusted his body and swam toward the direction the compass indicated. The sea now acted like a friend, with one hand helping Saul push aside the resistance ahead, while another hand gently propelled him forward. At this moment, Saul's swimming speed was actually not much slower than flying in the sky. However, after swimming for just 2 minutes, the compass pointer suddenly began trembling lightly and slowly moved toward another direction. Did it discover me, or did it happen to start moving? But at this distance, the other party shouldn't think of escaping Saul's tracking. Saul accelerated again. The black skeleton became a dark shadow, heading straight for the target. "Caught you." Soon, Saul's mental power directly captured the other party. His body suddenly softened from black bones into gray tentacles. Learning from seabed predators, he suddenly sprang forward, his body accelerating again. His tentacles coiled backward, directly entangling a slender black shadow ahead and cutting off its movement. The long tail struggled violently, but couldn't break free from Saul's restraint. More tentacles wrapped around it, directly coiling around the tail tip that came over to resist. However, Saul noticed something strange. How is this not like the one I saw in the Wizard Tower's history? It seems a bit thinner. Just then, Saul suddenly discovered that the compass in his left hand trembled again, then suddenly changed direction once more, abruptly pointing toward where Maria and Delenn had been. Saul suddenly understood, there are two tails. Chapter 934, The Long Tail's Special Ability. Could the tail that killed a third-rank wizard also kill Maria? That wouldn't do. She was the target he had just selected. But chasing after them now, carrying a struggling big tail, he might not make it in time. If I can't get there, then I'll have them come here. Saul immediately sent out a signal. This signal was originally prepared by Maria to notify Saul after diving underwater, but now Saul was using it to summon Maria and Delenn. One person's speed was hard to catch up to another tail, but with two people moving toward each other, it could shorten the distance he needed to chase. After sending the signal, he immediately received feedback from Maria, who said she would rush over immediately. Saul then swam toward Maria's direction. The long tail entangled by him was still struggling desperately. Saul turned back and glared at it coldly. I know you have consciousness. If you don't want to live forever in this tail form, you'd better cooperate obediently. The long tail that had been struggling violently suddenly went limp, but when Saul wanted to swim over, it struggled a bit again. It seemed to be torn, unsure whether it could trust Saul. Saul simply took out his diary and lightly tapped it on the long tail. The diary immediately issued a summons to the consciousness within the long tail, though Saul suppressed it so it couldn't absorb its soul. Feel that. I can let you leave this mutated body at any time, and I can also destroy your soul at any time. The tail entangled by Saul finally behaved. Saul used several tentacles to drag the boneless tail and continued accelerating forward until he sensed Maria in the distance, and she seemed to be in combat. He immediately stopped and changed form, turning back into a black skeletal frame. With a splash, Saul burst from the sea surface and immediately saw that Delenn was nowhere to be found, while Maria was wrapped by a black long tail. That tail was the one Saul had seen in the Wizard Tower's past. At this moment, Maria for some reason wasn't using magic attacks. Her face showed a pained expression, and her entire body was trembling. The long tail was trying to drag Maria into the seabed, but a red halo emanated from Maria's body, automatically resisting the tail's pulling. If not for this halo, Maria would probably have been dragged underwater before Saul arrived. And now, her persistence during this time had also saved Saul the trouble of chasing in the sea. Saul immediately commanded little Algae to guard the already captured long tail and directly charged into the opposing battlefield. Saul, be careful, it can cause pollution. Maria saw Saul coming and spoke with difficulty to warn him. Her voice was very small. Fortunately, Saul's mental power had already enveloped the area, and he clearly heard her warning. Pollution. Saul thought about how, when he captured the smaller long tail, he hadn't encountered any significant pollution. Could this be a unique ability of Robin's long tail before him? Since the ability was pollution, Saul wanted to see for himself. He had no intention of retreating and directly came to Maria's side. The equally black soul blades directly pierced into the torso wrapped around Maria, preparing to cut it off and first rescue Maria, whose condition was obviously abnormal. But strangely, the soul blades that had always been his offensive weapon seemed to sink into the ocean when they entered the long tail's torso, disappearing without a trace, while the long tail seemed to suffer no damage at all. It really is pollution, and black tide pollution at that. Saul flashed to avoid the tail attacking from behind, his expression constantly changing. Black tide pollution at a certain concentration can indeed disrupt elemental particle movement, causing magical power to fail. Their transformed bodies can actually contain such powerful black tide pollution and use it to neutralize third-rank wizard attacks. No wonder the long tail encountered almost no resistance when attacking third-rank Lawrence last time. With magical power sealed, what was there to fight with? The tail tip that had just flashed past appeared again, heading straight for Saul's chest, seemingly wanting to pierce through him. As Saul flashed again, that pointed tail suddenly opened like a flower, revealing 7 flesh petals and exposing the gray, spiral-muscled hole inside. Then that opening suddenly spewed out a large cloud of black smoke. The environment around the smoke became twisted and distorted in an instant, as if the world itself had been polluted by that black smoke. What spewed from the tail's opening was extremely concentrated black tide pollution. The black smoke was just its external manifestation. Saul quickly felt fluctuations similar to radiation. This form of black tide pollution fluctuation is more obvious in air, clearer than black tide in water, soil, and human bodies. Saul immediately realized this was an excellent opportunity to deeply study black tide pollution. He must capture this tail alive. He no longer held back, his entire being transformed again into a massive collection of tentacles, with only the black skull still quietly watching Maria. Maria gasped. She recognized Saul from that skull, but she strongly suspected whether Saul had already mutated. Even if he hadn't mutated, she had to report to Lord Murphy to monitor Saul's condition at all times, lest during battle, their ally suddenly turn against them. That would be a big trouble. Now being stared at by Saul's gray, misty eye sockets, Maria felt it was even more terrifying than being entangled by the long tail, injected with black tide pollution, and unable to struggle. But she didn't know that, although Saul's face was turned toward her, his gaze had long since shifted to Robin, whose tail was still mostly in the sea. Those gazes came from Saul's countless tentacles. Robin, who had originally been entangling Maria, saw Saul in this form and with a twist, actually abandoned Maria directly and jumped into the sea. "Wanna run?" Saul released 4 tentacles, forming the 4 corners of a square, plunging straight into the water like a cage chasing Robin. Those tentacles that entered the sea were completely unaffected by the pollution in the seawater. In places Maria couldn't see, the tentacles' suckers opened, but this time what was revealed wasn't mouths with dense teeth, but eyeballs with iridescent pupils. Being stared at by the eyeballs, even with the dark seawater refracting light, Robin couldn't resist at all. A pollution different from black tide pollution, more powerful pollution, spread rapidly through Robin's tail like ink dropped into clear water. Soon, Robin, who had been desperately fleeing, gradually lost momentum and drifted helplessly in the water like seaweed. Seeing this, Saul retracted the eyeballs from his tentacles. The 4 tentacles coiled and fished the limp black tail up from the ocean depths. On the other side, the other tail under little Algae's watch, which had been somewhat restless, trembled and no longer dared to think of escaping. Meanwhile, because Robin had fled and she couldn't recover her magical power, Maria almost fell into the sea. Fortunately, Saul was still watching her and used another tentacle to wrap around Maria's waist. Of course, Maria might have preferred falling into the sea. Saul was very careful, only letting the tentacles that entered the seawater to track open their star-shaped eyes, while other tentacles remained as they were. Otherwise, he'd have to worry about an eye appearing on Maria's forehead too. "Saul, are you still conscious?" As Saul was fishing up the long tail, Maria asked in a trembling voice. Saul turned his head. His body began gradually returning to human skeletal form, with only the 5 tentacles holding Maria and the long tails remaining outside. "I'm all right," Saul thought for a moment and gave a somewhat vague answer. Chapter 935, What's Been Polluted Is. Saul had Maria grab one end of the tail, while he fished for the other end like pulling noodles. The end Maria held was the tail tip that could spew black tide. Saul had seen this tail tip several times, but he had never seen the other end of the tail and didn't know what it would look like. He kept fishing for nearly 3 minutes before finally pulling up all the tail that had been hidden on the seabed. Somewhat unexpectedly yet reasonably, the other end was a severed cross-section. Just like a snake tail that had been cut in half, in the center of the swollen, rotting white flesh was a gray bone. The bone protruded slightly, while the white flesh from other areas squeezed and accumulated together. Several deep wrinkles were on top, with a crack located below the bone. This caused the tail's cross-section to look like a twisted face, with facial features squeezed together. And when this face emerged from the sea, it actually spoke. "Let me go, I'll leave the sighing wall." Maria, who had been somewhat wary of Saul, immediately shouted upon hearing the familiar voice. "Impossible! Robin, you really are Robin. How did you become like this?" Robin's head rose up like a snake head, positioning his face level with Maria's. "Why can't I live in this form? Doesn't this prove my wizard body transformation direction wasn't wrong? It just has some imperfections. I'm perfecting it. Once I finish my research, I can return to human form." Saul couldn't see Robin's vocal organs, but the voice was indeed coming from the crack below the bone. "Have you completely mutated now?" Saul asked him. Robin had originally wanted to mock Maria a few more times, but hearing Saul's question and remembering those eyes he had seen underwater, the rotting flesh on his face writhed and expelled some gray mucus. "My body has completely mutated, but because of the black tide pollution and this gray bone in the middle, most of my soul body has been preserved." Maria saw that Saul was very interested in Robin's current state and stopped interrupting. She discovered that the black tide pollution in her body was actually slowly decreasing. After checking herself, she found that Saul's tentacles were absorbing the pollution from her body. Maria remembered Saul's doctor title in the borderland and suddenly understood. Looking at the semi-transparent gray tentacle around her waist, it no longer seemed so frightening. Saul noticed that the black tide pollution in Maria's body had been mostly absorbed by him, and her soul body and magical fluctuations had stabilized. He slowly released Maria, letting her stand on the sea surface herself. After Maria used flight magic to stabilize in midair, she immediately rushed to Robin's terrifying face. "Where's Delenn? Where did you take him?" Maria also explained to Saul. "He suddenly appeared just now and swept Delenn into the sea." "Saul, did you see him when you went down?" "No, after diving I only caught up to his tail. The front end was very deep, and I didn't sense Delenn's presence." The second rank wizard loyal to Maria was probably in grave danger this time. He had escaped Benjamin's silencing attempt, but still died at the hands of the same gray bone product. Maria also had a bad feeling. She stepped forward and ignited a crimson flame, holding it in front of Robin. "Where is Delenn? If you don't tell me, I'll roast you." Robin's fold-like eyes looked at the fireball in Maria's hand. "I already ate him." "What?" Although Maria had already had a bad feeling when she lost trace of Delenn, she still couldn't help but cry out in shock upon hearing that Robin had eaten Delenn. However, she was also a veteran of battles and quickly composed herself, asking in a different way, "How did you eat Delenn?" Robin was silent for a moment before confessing honestly after Saul tightened his tentacles. "In my current state, I need to supplement wizard flesh and blood to maintain myself. Although my consciousness is attached to the tail, it's still just a tail. So I eat the meat and organs of the wizards I capture." needing to devour wizard flesh and organs to survive. You must have eaten more than one wizard by now, right? Saul asked Maria again. Have any other wizards gone missing at the Sighing Wall recently? Currently, the information we've received only mentions Lawrence and that second-rank wizard from last time. When Maria mentioned Lawrence's name, the other long tail being watched by little Algae in the sea suddenly writhed. Little Algae immediately looked up and called "ee" to Saul. Saul reached out and pulled the other long tail over. This tail was only about 20 meters long, much shorter than Robin's. He looked it up and down, then suddenly asked, "You're Lawrence?" The long tail didn't speak, but its body twisted and bent, like a person embarrassed enough to curl their toes. "It's Lawrence." Maria was even more shocked. Wasn't Lawrence eaten by Robin? Robin answered her question. Lawrence secretly transformed himself. I only discovered this after eating him. He hasn't adapted to his new body yet. I originally wanted him to lead you away, but I didn't expect him to be so useless. At this point, Robin realized he hadn't lasted many rounds against Saul either, and quickly shut his mouth. So people who underwent tailbone wizard body transformation can escape using their tails after death. Saul touched his chin, hearing the rustling sound of finger bones rubbing against his jawbone. Then did Delenn and the second-rank wizard you ate also become tails? Robin shook his head, and some gray liquid fell into the sea. Second-rank wizards can't achieve consciousness transfer yet. So it seemed Delenn truly had no chance. Saul shook his head. Dying like that might be luckier than becoming a tail. Who knew that upon hearing Saul's sigh, the previously obedient Robin suddenly began struggling. Although he couldn't break free from Saul's restraint, he spoke up to refute Saul. Who says this isn't good? Although my current form has flaws, given time and opportunity, I can always perfect my body. Moreover, I can survive long-term in the deep sea polluted by black tide. Before eating Lawrence, I could also survive by devouring sea monsters and fish and shrimp. And what about you? When the black tide completely destroys this world, you'll only have death waiting. Saul's tentacles twisted hard, directly wringing Robin's body into a pretzel. Be honest. He actually agreed with some of Robin's viewpoints, but couldn't allow him to speak to him so arrogantly. I'm not wrong. Robin's voice was clearly distorted from pain, but he remained stubborn. I've already seen clearly. The Sighing Wall has no meaning in existing. Having wizards die one after another for ordinary people. Ridiculous, idiotic. Maria bit her lips. Is that really what you think? Don't you know that without the Sighing Wall, the entire Stat continent would be pulled into the abyssal eye? Where could you run then? Why run? This world follows survival of the fittest. Those who can survive naturally should survive, and those who can't deserve to die. Look, didn't I survive? Robin's rotting flesh face turned toward Saul again. Hasn't this wizard also survived in his own way? Saul moved his jawbone slightly, thinking, I'm much more elegant than you. Robin didn't know what Saul was thinking. Seeing him remain silent, he thought it was agreement and became even more arrogant. So, Maria, you might as well join us. The entire world's continents are going to be finished anyway. Only by becoming creatures adapted to the new ocean can we survive, because what's been polluted isn't the monsters in the ocean at all. It's the entire ocean. Chapter 936, Teaching by Example. The entire ocean surrounding the 3 continents. This news was like tearing off the world's last scab, completely exposing the bloody truth before Saul's eyes. Yes, the sea has already been polluted, and the pollution process is accelerating. Perhaps we ultimately cannot escape the fate of being submerged by the black tide. Inside the Sighing Wall, Wizard Murphy sighed desolately. After hearing the accounts from Maria and Saul, his expression was sorrowful, all his wrinkles drooping down, making him appear exceptionally aged. After capturing Robin and Lawrence, who they had thought was dead, Saul and Maria returned to the sighing wall. To avoid causing panic among other wizards, Maria deliberately went to bring out Wizard Murphy, and the three came directly to a sparsely populated area where Murphy deployed a concealment domain to block others' sight. After examining Robin and Lawrence's conditions, Wizard Murphy didn't react much, but upon hearing Maria repeat Robin's words, he seemed greatly affected. Maria quickly comforted him. "Lord Murphy, people with such thoughts are still a minority. Everyone else is firmly defending the sighing wall." Murphy raised his head, looking at Maria, who was no longer young but whose appearance remained unaged. "Yes, the sighing wall has been able to persist until now thanks to all of you." Maria shook her head repeatedly. "If you weren't supporting the sighing wall, how could we fight the black tide monsters?" Murphy smiled, his mood seeming to improve considerably. "The sighing wall will always stand in the north." "Yes," Maria nodded firmly. Saul didn't interrupt. After all, he wasn't from here. But while observing, he felt something strange. How could Wizard Murphy, who had persisted in the far north for over 100 years, appear so fragile? Seeing that Saul hadn't spoken, Murphy asked him, "Wizard Saul, what do you think of Robin's choice?" Saul thought for a moment. If something cannot be accomplished, then Robin's choice isn't a bad option for survival. But unless all paths are blocked, I wouldn't take this route. Seeing that Saul didn't particularly firmly oppose Robin, Murphy was both surprised and felt that Saul was indeed worthy of being Gorse's student. "Oh, by the way, Lord Murphy, I'll take Robin with me. I'm quite interested in the tailbone transformation on him." Murphy agreed but also warned Saul, some transformations shouldn't be attempted lightly. Saul's brow relaxed. "Don't worry, I'm very skilled at wizard body transformation." 7 days later, the black tide pollution arrived precisely as predicted at the far north. On the day the black tide came, Saul flew in the clouds, quietly watching the distance. Like the black tide at Nefret, a wave connecting heaven and earth appeared from the horizon, then approached seemingly slowly but actually extremely fast. The humidity in the air was rapidly rising. Even more terrifying was the appearance of large amounts of black tide pollution in the thick moisture. They were like agar pressing in from all directions, making one feel an invisible suffocation. Magical power rapidly disintegrated. The flight spell was instantly defeated and Saul began free falling. But he wasn't anxious. Instead, he calmly cast the flight spell again. Magical power disintegrated again, but this time, Saul timely supplemented more magical power to maintain the flight spell's operation. In this environment, third-rank wizards can barely fly. Second-rank wizards probably really can only rely on wizard towers for combat. No wonder this topography formed. The black tide was already approaching. Saul could even see the waves at the topmost layer and the white monsters mixed in the black seawater. "So big," Saul exclaimed. "The black tide monsters here are indeed different from those at the Red Sea." Maria had already told Saul that the black tide monsters at the Red Sea mainly won through numbers, but at the sighing wall, perhaps because it was closer to the abyssal eye, what was attracted were mostly huge and extremely powerful black tide monsters. Behind Saul, several third-rank wizards were already distributed among nearby wizard towers. They would join Saul in resisting the black tide's first assault. "Saul, come down when you've seen enough. Don't waste magical power." Only Kelly dared to shout at Saul like this from below. Saul immediately flew down. His observation in the sky certainly wasn't to show off, but to analyze the first wave of black tide's intensity and the monsters about to appear within it. It was just that those black tide monsters had been hiding in the waves, only occasionally showing a bit of limb. The black tide here is half higher than at the Red Sea, and the pollution concentration is also higher. You stay inside the wizard tower and coordinate attacks with me. Kelly wouldn't be stubborn at a time like this. She nodded and quickly ran through the door at the tower top, which immediately sealed and merged with the surrounding walls. But shortly after Kelly entered the wizard tower, a small window appeared at the tower top with a long cylinder extending out, like a sealed gun turret. That was Haley cooperating with Kelly to change the wizard tower's external form. However, the cannon wouldn't be loaded with shells. It would only release magical scrolls or other magical tools with higher stability. Kelly would release different attacks depending on the situation. The tower top where Saul stood should have originally manifested a protective shield to appropriately isolate black tide pollution, but Saul didn't have Haley release it. After all, that bit of energy would be better used by Kelly to fire shells. In any case, Saul still had resistance to this level of black tide pollution. With everything prepared, Saul saw a blurred figure suddenly appear on the distant first wizard tower. Why did my master come out? Saul was somewhat puzzled. To later retreat into the abyssal eye with the black tide, Gorsa originally wasn't planning to act in this battle. However, he appeared at the very beginning of the battle. The black tide was already approaching Gorsa's first wizard tower. Saul could even hear the sound of huge waves breaking through seawater resistance. At this time, Gorsa in the distance suddenly raised his hand and waved. Just like a professor tapping the blackboard in a classroom, then telling his students, "Look here, this problem should be solved like this." Then Gorsa's figure suddenly burst into a ball of light, directly charging into the overwhelming waves that had reached right before him. Saul vaguely heard a boom, and a huge white rotting creature was directly pushed out of the black tide by Gorsa. Gorsa's figure then also emerged from the waves, moving extremely fast, almost like teleportation. His entire being went from bright to dark, transforming into an unclear black shadow, with an extremely bright light point appearing behind the shadow. That shadow instantly expanded 100-fold, immediately surpassing the rotting monster he had just knocked out. The top and bottom of the shadow immediately curled up like a huge mouth, swallowing the monster. Then the bright light behind the shadow instantly dimmed, and the originally huge shadow shrank accordingly, almost returning to normal human size. A sound like squeezing cream echoed between heaven and earth. The rotting monster hadn't been able to break through the obstruction after the shadow shrank, but was directly compressed to its limit. No need to think. Going from over 100 meters tall directly to 2 meters in size, the body had been compressed and deformed. Then the light suddenly extinguished. The shadow writhed for a moment and turned back into Gorsa. He stood in place. Due to the distance being too far, his expression couldn't be seen clearly. Saul, who had watched from beginning to end, knowingly raised his hand and also waved twice. He was telling his master, "I understand." Chapter 937, Something That Shouldn't Exist. He acted extremely quickly. From attacking to eliminating the black tide monster took only a few short seconds. It wasn't until he entered the wizard tower that the massive black tide submerged the first wizard tower. Saul raised his hand to put the mermaid's tear in his mouth, while releasing the nightmare butterfly from his diary. He watched the black tide about to engulf the second wizard tower, mentally reciting the key points Gorsa had taught. First, kick the monster out of the black tide. He suddenly raised his hand. All his muscles instantly disappeared, turning him back into a black skeleton wearing a black cloak. This skeleton was equally agile, charging out like a cannonball. Like his instructor, he rushed into the towering waves about to crash down head-on, directly knocking a black tide monster hiding within out from behind the waves. Then the black tide covered the wizard tower. But the tall, slender wizard tower still stood firm in the huge waves, just as it had for the hundreds of years it had endured. At the same time, a real cannonball fired from the wizard tower's gun turret. The iron-gray shelled cannonball relied entirely on physical force to charge out, moving forward unstoppably through the thick moisture, dodging the twisted monster limbs and directly hitting the chest of the monster below Saul. The cannonball immediately exploded, scattering shell fragments. This was a hollow shell hiding Kelly's real weapon inside, a black-tide inertization scroll. This scroll was activated under the explosive force's guidance. After hitting the monster's chest, it immediately spread out hundreds of steel needles that pierced the monster's surface. The monster's chest visibly accelerated its decay, with gray bones fading like bleached color to light gray, then to white. Positioned at the monster's head, Saul took advantage of the creature being stunned by Kelly's inertization scroll hit. He immediately transformed his right hand into a massive tentacle 1 meter in diameter, coiling around the black tide monster's head like a python, directly sealing its eyes and ears. Black tide warfare was a prolonged battle with almost no rest time, so Saul didn't transform his entire body into tentacles, only converting one arm. The dense suckers on the tentacle opened their mouths, biting down on the monster's head, then began sucking the black tide pollution from within the monster. This was different from treating others, extremely fast, with no consideration for tolerance. Soon the huge monster's head was sucked flat, like a deflated balloon. After removing the head, Saul flipped downward. Countless black broken blades appeared behind him like a shockwave, smashing the monster's chest that Kelly had just inertized. His first black tide monster opponent was eliminated just like that. However, it was merely one of the monsters hidden in the first wave. Gorsa had intercepted the largest one. Saul had selected another of similar size, but dozens of monsters were still being carried by the black tide toward the far north. Most of them would also be intercepted by other wizard towers standing in Storm Sea. Third-rank wizards were in good condition, but second-rank wizards needed to coordinate with wizard tower defenses to fight the massive black tide monsters. Maria, as a patrol wizard, moved between various wizard towers. Whenever she saw someone in danger, she would go help. During such battles, the second wave also appeared before them. This time, Gorsa didn't appear again. Saul transformed 2 more tentacles. The moment the second black tide swept over the second wizard tower, his 3 tentacles each coiled around 3 monsters, intercepting them from the waves. Then he repeated his tactics, cooperating seamlessly with Kelly to eliminate the 3 rotting black tide monsters one by one. Haley, hiding inside the wizard tower and controlling it, watched Saul's battle through the observation port, stunned with amazement. Although he was only a third-level wizard apprentice, he had witnessed many high-rank wizard battles. No one could so easily eliminate 3 monsters in the black tide. Not even Gorsa from back then. He suddenly realized that this Saul, who had become a third-rank wizard in the borderland, was completely different from the kind of third-rank wizards he thought were raised by the Tribunal and Stargate Council. He was not only skilled in combat but also extremely good at dealing with black tide monsters. Such a person was practically born for the Sighing Wall. Haley gripped the crystal pillar tightly, thinking that once the battle ended, he must suggest to Wizard Murphy to keep Saul directly. As for the borderland, at worst they could send 2 more third-rank wizards there. With Saul's strength, 1 for 2 would definitely be no problem. Haley's experience was still insufficient. He didn't know that at the Tribunal, Saul had single-handedly blocked hundreds of wizards, including several third-rank wizards. The Tribunal had completely suppressed this matter for stability and reputation. Saul and the Glare Patriarch hadn't spoken of it publicly either. They still needed Wizard Alo to help them imprison Frim and maintain the stability of Nefrit's coastline, so they naturally had to consider some of the Tribunal's interests. Each black tide battle generally lasted 3 to 5 days, occasionally exceeding 7 days. Battles lasting over 7 days brought greater losses, with casualties mostly occurring at such times. After the first few waves passed, Saul alone had eliminated 13 black tide monsters. Afterward, the black tide slowed slightly. Haley informed Saul that the next large-scale black tide would arrive in about half an hour. Saul and Kelly quickly took this opportunity to rest briefly, replenish magical power, and calm their spiritual bodies that had been constantly agitated during battle. Haley originally wanted to take the opportunity to chat with Saul, but Saul only sent in a gray sphere for Kelly to carefully guard, with no intention of entering the wizard tower to rest. This left Haley, who had just been shocked by Saul and was eager to talk with him, somewhat disappointed. 30 minutes passed quickly, and 100-meter-high black tide waves appeared again. Saul stood up from the wizard tower top, stretching his limbs. This time, he prepared 10 tentacles for the monsters in the black tide. Others came to storm sea wizard towers to prevent monsters from approaching the sighing wall, but he wasn't here for that. According to Master Gorsa's words, he was here to experience life. Since it was experiencing life, naturally he had to challenge limits. The current him couldn't even enter the abyssal eye, so naturally he had to properly train his ability to resist the black tide. These corrupted black tide monsters before him were just the beginning. He wanted to learn from Kelly, gradually breaking through his own limits of pollution tolerance and developing calluses on his spiritual body. He believed that someday he could arm wrestle with anchor points. The black tide had already approached the first wizard tower and would soon reach Saul. But just then, a massive monster so rotten that barely any flesh hung on its body suddenly actively walked out of the black tide. It headed straight for the first wizard tower, as if it had suddenly identified its target. Master Gorsa didn't appear, seemingly not caring about the enemy at all. The black tide monster lowered its head and charged at the first wizard tower like a mad bull. However, the wizard tower bent like tough grass without breaking. When the monster's impact weakened, it suddenly rebounded, directly shooting the tall, rotting monster back into the sea. The monster seemed enraged. Opening its mouth that was nothing but bones, it suddenly roared. Saul didn't hear any sound, but he saw a mass of black smoke spew from the monster's mouth. Just as the black mist was about to envelop the wizard tower, a smaller white object drilled out from the black mist like a hummingbird, hitting the first wizard tower at extremely high speed. Unlike the rotting monster that was bounced back, it actually penetrated directly through the wizard tower, emerging from the wall on the other side. Saul's 10 tentacles suddenly spread open, surrounding his body in an instinctive self-protective response, because he had seen something that absolutely shouldn't appear here. A living anchor point. Chapter 938, Extremely Bad. The upper half of the tower fell directly against the lower half into the seawater, creating huge splashes. These splashes were then swallowed by the following black tide. Large amounts of seawater poured into the shattered wizard tower, flowing out through other cracks and carrying away more debris. Just one wave licked away most of the remaining foundation. How many more waves could that broken half-tower withstand? Kelly, stay inside the tower, don't come out. If you can't hold on, immediately seal the wizard tower. You know what I mean. Saul shouted to Kelly. What about you? Kelly's anxious voice came from inside the cannon. Saul watched the small white figure that flew back and landed on the huge rotting monster's head, saying grimly, I must stop that anchor point. After speaking, without waiting for Kelly's response, he immediately took off and flew toward the first wizard tower. He never would have thought that just moments ago he was saying he wanted to practice with black tide monsters to eventually confront anchor points. Yet when he looked up, an anchor point appeared right before him. Hey, a wild boss spawned in the newbie leveling area. Saul thought with bitter humor. Moreover, the anchor point appearing here wasn't the kind of fragment that emerged from storm eyes in the borderland. It was a complete, mobile, intact skeleton, just like those grayish-white skeletons Saul had seen in the world outside the Chaos Realm. That was a terrifying monster from the Abyssal Eye. It was the horrifying pollution source that could cause a third-rank wizard to mutate with just one encounter with an anchor point fragment. Not to mention this living, complete anchor point before him. Saul couldn't imagine what would happen if it approached the second wizard tower he was guarding. Even if Kelly hid on the bottom floor, she probably couldn't escape the anchor point's pollution. She could only hide back in the Chaos Realm. But even if Kelly was fine, what about the others? If the sighing wall was breached, Saul's fourth symphony of fate target would die in the black tide. That wouldn't do. Saul's eyes seemed to ignite with two flames, followed by his body completely transforming into black bones, not even preserving his left hand. Little algae fell into the sea with a splash along with the storage device. It wanted to catch up but was stopped by Saul's mental power. It eeped twice, knowing it couldn't cause trouble for Saul, so it swallowed the storage device with its mouth and continued eeping as it swam toward the ocean depths. Casting aside all concerns, Saul dove through the first wave, second wave, and before the third wave could further destroy the first wizard tower, landed on the broken walls. Master Gorsa. No response. Saul's heart tightened. Even if it was a living anchor point, it couldn't have killed Gorsa in just one strike, could it? That was Gorsa. The rotting monster still guarding near the first wizard tower had turned to look at him. The anchor point on top seemed very interested in Saul and didn't immediately attack. Only then did Saul see clearly that the anchor point looked like four wings stuck together, with no head or torso, but still a complete entity. Two wings were spread out while two were folded together, like a person with arms crossed observing Saul while ready to attack at any moment. Seeing that the other party wasn't approaching, Saul quickly swept the entire wreckage with his mental power. If there was no trace of Master Gorsa here either, he could only try searching in the upper half of the wizard tower that had fallen into the sea. He just didn't know if the anchor point across from him would give him that chance. At this time, he finally sensed someone's mental power at the tower's base. Not Gorsa, but someone he recognized. Saul stomped through the broken wizard tower with one foot, falling through the stair cracks to the bottom level. He saw a figure half buried in the rubble pile. Haywood. Saul immediately pulled Haywood up. Haywood wasn't seriously injured, but his body was already showing mutation reactions. His eyes looked like they had just exploded, with red and yellow viscous liquid stuck to his face. His original two eyes had become two flesh holes covered with tiny flesh buds, like little earthworms half burrowed into soil. After pulling him out, Saul directly used tentacles to absorb the pollution from Haywood's face. His eyes didn't recover, but all the flesh buds fell out of his eye sockets. Haywood was clutching something tightly in his hand, but when Saul looked down, there was actually nothing there. Haywood, can you still move? The anchor point across from them seemed almost finished observing Saul. The two bone wings that had been folded together were slowly opening. Saul was certain that once the other party's wings fully opened, it would be when it attacked again. Haywood couldn't see, but he recognized Saul's voice. I can cough. Where is Master Gorsa, and where's Heidi? After Master Gorsa saw you kill the first monster, he left with peace of mind. So Master Gorsa had left long ago. Saul smiled bitterly. It seemed his master had seen him dealing with black tide monsters easily and directly ran away, transferring the task of facing the black tide's first line to him. But he probably never imagined that anchor points would appear in this black tide war. Now his idea of jointly resisting anchor points with Master Gorsa had fallen through. He had to get Wizard Murphy here. Otherwise, Saul alone had no confidence in repelling this kind of complete anchor point. Most of Saul's attention was on the anchor point across from him, so he didn't notice that Haywood hadn't mentioned his sister Heidi at all. His clenched hand just gripped tighter, as if he had once desperately tried to grab something. But there was nothing left in his palm. Since Master Gorsa was no longer here, Saul decided to first retreat to the second wizard tower, then have Haley call Murphy. If the anchor point attacked the second wizard tower again, he would have Kelly hide directly in the Chaos Realm. The others could only fend for themselves. However, just as Saul was preparing to evacuate with Haywood, an aged figure suddenly appeared above them both. "Wizard Murphy," Saul called out in delight. It seemed the other party was also constantly monitoring the frontline situation. Otherwise, how could he appear here immediately after the wizard tower was destroyed? And he had teleported here. Previously, he had almost never teleported on Storm Sea. "Saul, I sense the first wizard tower's crystal pillar shatter. Has Gorsa already left?" Murphy asked without turning back. He obviously easily recognized the skeletal Saul. With Murphy's appearance, the anchor point across from them seemed like an enraged beast, its four wings raised high and trembling slightly. "Yes, Lord Murphy, we must stop it." Murphy still didn't turn back. "Not we, me. You take the others and leave, continue guarding your wizard tower." Saul frowned, though he had no eyebrows, and disagreed. "Lord Murphy, can you defeat the anchor point? I haven't sealed such a lively one before." Murphy seemed to be joking, but his voice was incredibly heavy. Obviously, the appearance of an active anchor point at the Sighing Wall was extremely bad news for him too. "Then please let me assist you." Saul slowly extended his left hand. His left hand was clenched in a fist, firmly wrapping the first white finger joint in his palm. "I have some resistance to this thing." Chapter 939, Behind the Rift. Penny would take Haywood to the second wizard tower. The reason for not sending him further away was that there were rotting black tide monsters everywhere. Even though Penny was a nightmare butterfly, she couldn't guarantee safely taking Haywood away to a more distant location. The nearest second wizard tower was relatively safe, unless both Saul and Murphy couldn't withstand the anchor point. When Saul sent Haywood away, Murphy disappeared from the ruins of the first wizard tower and reappeared inside the monster's body beneath the anchor point. The black tide monster had rotted until almost only bones remained, which actually made it easier for Murphy to approach its skull from below. However, the four-winged anchor point perched on the monster's head didn't care about the monster beneath its feet at all. With a light bounce, it directly shattered the monster's skull and rushed toward Murphy. Murphy had long been prepared for the opponent's attack. His body sank simultaneously, heavy as a mountain peak, likewise crushing the monster's ribs as he rapidly fell into the sea. Wizard Murphy actually took the initiative to enter the sea. Saul recalled what Robin had said, that it was truly the ocean that was polluted. Could it be that Wizard Murphy wants to use pollution to isolate pollution? Saul's mind brightened. No longer hesitating, his entire body transformed into a black arrow, piercing the sea surface and diving deep into the seabed. Upon entering the ocean, Saul saw Wizard Murphy continuing to sink deeper while wrestling with the anchor point. Whether due to the anchor point's influence or Murphy's own control, his arm in contact with the anchor point, along with his nearby face and neck, had all turned into clod-like forms. Fragments were constantly being carried away by the seawater. But Murphy's expression looked very calm, as if everything was still under his control. "Saul, hold down, seabed." The other's voice came through intermittently. Saul immediately transformed into a shadow, rushing toward the anchor point. Drawing close, Saul's hand quickly pressed down on one of the anchor point's wings, then increased his strength, cooperating with Murphy below to jointly escort the anchor point toward the seabed. Two people and one monster descended rapidly, traveling through darkness for a long time before finally approaching the seabed. Murphy freed one hand and suddenly reached downward. The seabed he pointed at suddenly began growing upward. The rising land had a cross-section of over 100 square meters, splitting open in a cross pattern at the center like a giant mouth trying to swallow all three in one gulp. Murphy's upper body, which had turned to earth, suddenly softened and instead wrapped around the anchor point that was restraining him. Seeing this scene, Saul knew his guess was correct. Murphy wanted to seal the anchor point at the bottom of the sea. This might only be a short-term seal, but as long as they waited for the black tide to pass, they could free up their hands to relocate the anchor point again. Saul let go. Being close, Murphy's voice transmission became very clear. The other was a wizard who specialized in earth attributes. The seabed couldn't trap him, but it would be troublesome for Saul to get out. Murphy couldn't possibly risk the anchor point escaping by opening a door for Saul alone. Seeing Murphy about to enter the cross-shaped opening, Saul quickly released his grip and retreated rapidly to avoid being drawn in. However, just as the anchor point was about to be pulled underground by Murphy, Murphy's upper body suddenly exploded in place, earth clods scattering and turning into a muddy mess in the sea. The white anchor point also broke free at that instant. The next second, the mud automatically reorganized back into Murphy's human form. Looking at the anchor point that had already escaped more than 10 meters away, he was about to risk teleporting. But in the next second, Saul's figure appeared beside the anchor point first and grabbed hold of it. It turned out that while Saul was pressing the anchor point downward, he had left a tiny bit of soul fragment on it. Under the anchor point's pollution, this bit of soul fragment couldn't last very long and would soon be polluted by the anchor point, losing its coordinate ability. But just in case, he had still left it behind, and unexpectedly it really came in handy. After Saul grabbed the anchor point, he immediately felt his fingers cracking, as if they might crumble to powder at any moment. To prevent the anchor point from escaping, he could only redirect all his magical power to repair his palm. But because of this, the pollution from the anchor point began to reversely infect his entire body through his magical power. This was the terrifying aspect of anchor points. Living anchor points didn't have particularly strong combat power, but the pollution they inherently carried was impossible to defend against. They could only endure it, as if competing to see who lived longer. Fortunately, Saul wasn't fighting alone. Murphy had already appeared behind the anchor point. Having learned from the previous accident, Murphy this time directly transformed his entire body into a silvery white soft substance, instantly wrapping around the anchor point. Then the remaining soft material layered on top, sealing the anchor point completely within a silvery white spherical center. Afterward, that silvery white sphere actually teleported directly into the interior of the cross-shaped opening. Saul watched with his heart in his throat. Could he actually teleport while carrying the anchor point? Wasn't he afraid of dying here? He was the creator of the Sighing Wall, and also the guarantee that the Sighing Wall could stand to this day. Wasn't he afraid that if he died, the Sighing Wall would also be destroyed? Worry aside, Saul could only follow at a moderate distance to prevent another accident from occurring. But an accident really did occur again. A rift suddenly appeared on the seabed. It wasn't rock splitting or seawater separating, but a genuine spatial fissure. The rift was a full meter long, with constantly shifting colors in the gap between. Saul's mental power disappeared into it the instant it detected the rift. When the rift appeared, the silvery white sphere that Murphy had transformed into immediately became motionless, then as if attracted by a powerful magnetic force, rushed uncontrollably toward the rift. Just as Saul was about to intervene, he suddenly discovered that his left hand was also experiencing an extremely terrifying attractive force. That suction was actually coming from the anchor point fragment at his fingertip. Saul and the silvery white sphere that Murphy had transformed into were simultaneously attracted by that rift, arriving at the rift's entrance almost simultaneously. The interior of the rift was complete chaos. Saul couldn't sense at all what things were inside or what kind of world it was. But the diary gave him the answer. Lunar calendar year 324, September 19th. The suddenly appearing eye interrupted the course of history. Life that should have been sleeping struggles and trembles unwillingly. SHH, you've awakened it. When you are completely seen by it, that will be your last moments in this world. The rift appeared too quickly. Saul had no time to actively sense the opponent's danger. Fortunately, the diary could still provide active warnings. But at the same time, the diary's warning came too late. It was as if the previous second it had also been deceived by the rift, only reacting when Saul was about to be sucked into the rift. However, better late than never. Saul already understood what was inside that rift. That was the Abyssal Eye, the most terrifying source hidden within the Black Tide vortex. He had no time to think and grabbed the silvery white sphere that was about to be sucked into the rift ahead of him. Wizard Murphy, release the anchor point. Murphy made no sound, but the silvery white sphere split in half, and the four-winged anchor point that had been trapped inside was instantly sucked into the rift. But Murphy was too close to the rift. Although he had released the anchor point in time, his body continued moving toward the rift due to inertia. The transformation and the anchor point's influence made it impossible for Murphy to escape immediately. At the same time, Saul couldn't remove the anchor point from his index finger and was still being drawn toward the rift, but he still didn't give up. Plop! A strange sound rang out. An eye suddenly appeared on Saul's shin bone. However, this was just the beginning. A large number of prismatic eyes, like bubbles emerging from boiling water, continuously appeared, exploded, appeared again, and exploded again. After the eyes appeared, Saul's speed approaching the rift immediately slowed down, finally stopping completely just as he was about to touch the fissure. The diary gave no further warnings, clearly indicating that Saul's decisive summoning of eyes all over his body was an absolutely correct choice. Only then did Murphy recover from the anchor point's influence, barely returning to human form. When he looked at Saul again, he discovered that this young wizard who had turned into a complete skeleton was actually covered with eyes. Countless new eyes squeezed out from the gaps between already existing eyes, their density like the most full-grained grapes. Murphy had never seen such a scene before. His sole body, already battered and worn, finally reached its limit. His eyes rolled back and he fainted. Chapter 940, Reaching the End. The diary warned that as long as Saul was seen by the Abyssal Eye, he would completely disappear from this world. But what if the Abyssal Eye couldn't see him? Therefore, Saul immediately used all his strength to activate the star-shaped eyes within his body. Those eyes had been confined for 3 years. Once unleashed, they eagerly competed to emerge from Saul's consciousness space. As Saul had expected, the star-shaped eyes fearlessly stared back at the rift without any sign of being pulled into it. After a long staring contest, that rift finally disappeared from the seabed. Only then did Saul retract the eyes covering his body's surface. However, this time the eyes had been out for a longer period, making it somewhat troublesome to push them back one by one. After nearly an hour, Saul finally completely recovered. Behind him, Murphy had already awakened first. After waking up, he no longer looked at Saul, silently sitting cross-legged on the seabed with his back turned, raising his head to gaze at the sea surface as if looking up at the starry sky. "Wizard Murphy, let's go up." Saul felt somewhat embarrassed. He now had a rough idea of what he looked like when he manifested the star-shaped eyes. It was truly unsightly, commonly known as an eyesore. Of course, he was more afraid that when Wizard Murphy turned around, his face would also be covered with eyes. However, Wizard Murphy was after all a fourth-rank wizard. When he heard Saul's voice and turned around, his body showed no signs of mischievous star-shaped eyes. Just as Saul was about to breathe a sigh of relief, he was choked by Murphy's next words. "I can't go up anymore." Murphy's voice was very calm. Saul's bone head swayed blankly twice. "Are you injured, or is there a problem with your soul body?" Murphy spread his hands, letting Saul see his lower body. From the waist down, Murphy had already turned into grayish-white rock. Earlier he had also transformed into a silvery-white soft substance, but at that time he was full of aggression. Now his grayish-white body revealed a heavy aura of death. "Saul, I have reached the end." The gray light in Saul's eye sockets flickered. "I am already very, very old. But you are now a fourth-rank wizard, nearly immortal. If I wanted immortality, perhaps I could achieve it, but my path has come to an end. If I continued living, I would be nothing more than a sturdy shell." Saul half-crouched down so Murphy wouldn't have to look up at him. "But the sighing wall still needs you." "If not for the sighing wall, I wouldn't have forced myself to persist until now. Although this anchor point appeared rather abruptly, it's better than if it had appeared after my departure. At that time, even if I wanted to protect Far North City, I would have no way to do so. Saul, I have been forcing myself to hold on for many years." Saul had nothing to say. Indeed, even Glare family patriarch Norton had reached his end. How could Wizard Murphy, who was even older than Norton and had been using all his strength to support the sighing wall, not be tired? The path to advancing to fifth rank in this world had been sealed. Fourth-rank wizards who couldn't advance wandered day after day through their known knowledge. But the stronger they became, the more they understood their existing knowledge. Yet the more they understood, the more they discovered that knowledge they once thought crystal clear would become strange at specific times, seeming somehow wrong, yet they couldn't pinpoint what was amiss. It was like being imprisoned in a small, dark room, clearly knowing there was a vast world outside, yet being unable to find a way out. Because the door to the outside world had already been sealed shut. Only at this moment did Saul finally understand why the Stargate Council, regardless of the dangers in the outside world, insisted on launching the Stargate project. They were like people in a sealed room who had discovered a hole. Through that hole, they saw a glimmer of light. This single ray of light was enough to inspire infinite longing for the outside world. So even if they crashed until their heads were bloody, even if they wore their flesh raw, they would force themselves to squeeze through that hole. "Is there anything you need me to do?" Saul asked softly. Since Murphy already knew his time was near, he should have made arrangements long ago. He didn't believe Murphy would just watch his life's work, the sighing wall, turn to nothing in the next black tide. "No need, I've actually already made arrangements." As Murphy spoke, his face showed some guilt. "In the end, I was willful just once." Saul didn't understand. Could dying without struggle at life's end also be considered willful? Was Wizard Murphy being too strict with himself? Murphy smiled wearily. "You'll understand." Having said that, he closed his eyes. "I should fight alongside my old friends now." The moment Wizard Murphy closed his eyes, the grayish-white color from his lower body rapidly spread upward. When he finished his last word, the petrification had already expanded to his lips, then his nose, eyes, and forehead. In just a few breaths, this Wizard Murphy, who had supported the sighing wall for over 100 years, completely turned into a stone statue. But the changes didn't stop there. The ground beneath his feet rose up, absorbing nearby foundation soil and rapidly growing taller. Saul, standing beside him, was pushed up together until they approached the sea surface. Standing up, Saul could touch the air with his raised hand. Then Wizard Murphy's corpse also began to change. His body continuously deformed and expanded, gradually losing its original human shape and becoming a cylindrical stone sculpture with an unsmooth exterior. The stone sculpture that Murphy had become continued to enlarge and grow, soon breaking through the sea surface. This is a wizard tower. Saul could no longer suppress his shock, following the rising stone sculpture as it flew out of the sea. The cylindrical stone sculpture continued changing its form, gradually taking on the appearance of a wizard tower. However, its outer layer was full of wrinkles, like Wizard Murphy's weathered skin. The sea surface had somehow returned to calm. The black tide that should have lasted several days was now nowhere to be seen. The pollution concentration in the air had also returned to the level from a month before the black tide's arrival. It was as if Saul had only experienced a little over an hour on the seabed, while several days had passed on the sea surface. Saul, Maria's voice transmission came from far to near, her figure also growing from small to large, finally standing before Saul. She recognized Saul's black bone form and his mental power fluctuations. Seeing Maria approach, Saul quickly grew muscle and skin to conceal the anchor point on his left hand. Saul, I just received a message from Haley saying that an insurmountable enemy had appeared here, but before I could arrive, the black tide suddenly retreated. The black tide monsters left behind also became listless. Did you do something? She looked around. Haley also notified Wizard Murphy. Hasn't he arrived yet? Saul looked at Maria and said softly, Wizard Murphy, he has reached his end. Maria was stunned, not understanding what Saul meant for a long time. Or perhaps she didn't want to understand. Saul understood her feelings, but as wizards guarding the sighing wall, there was no time to escape reality. He placed his hand on the wizard tower wall beside him. He chose to accompany you all in another way. The original first wizard tower was destroyed by the monster. This is the new first wizard tower. Although it's wrinkled, it's still solid and sturdy. Maria's tears immediately began to flow.